It is the annihilation of earthly joys and the pleasures of mortal life. Why study it? Asked the luxurious. In all simplicity, to know it, and possibly after trust of stupid unbelief or puerile credulity. Men of pleasure, and half of these I count for so many women, is not gratified curiosity highly pleasurable. Read therefore without fear. You will not be magicians against your will. Readiness for absolute renunciation is, moreover, necessary only in order to establish universal currents and transform the face of the world. There are relative magical operations, limited to a certain circle, which do not need such heroic virtues. We can act upon passions by passions, determine sympathies or antipathies, hurt even and heal without possessing the omnipotence of the magus. In this case, however, we must realize the risk of a reaction in proportion to the action, and to such risk we may fall easily a victim. All this will be explained in our ritual. To make the magic chain is to establish a magnetic current which becomes stronger in proportion to the extent of the chain. We shall see in the ritual how such currents can be produced, and what are the various modes of forming the chain. Mesmer's trough was a chain of an exceedingly imperfect kind. Several great circles of Illuminati in different northern countries possess others more potent. Even that association of Catholic priests celebrated for their occult power and their unpopularity is established upon the plan and follows the conditions of the most potent magical chains. Herein is the secret of their force, which they attribute solely to the grace or will of God, a vulgar and easy solution for every mystery of power and influence or attraction. In the ritual, it will be our task to estimate the sequence of truly magical ceremonies and evocations, which constitute the great work of vocation under the name of the exercises of Saint Ignatius. All enthusiasm propagated in a society by a scheme of intercourse and fixed practices in common produces a magnetic current, and is maintained or increased by the current. The action of the current is to transport and often to exalt beyond measure persons who are impressionable and weak, nervous organizations, temperaments inclined to hysteria or hallucination. Such people soon become powerful vehicles of magical force and project efficiently the astral light in the direction of the current itself. Opposition at such a time to the manifestations of the force is, to some extent, a struggle with fatality. When the youthful Pharisee Saul or Skull threw himself with all the fanaticism and all the obstinacy of a sectarian across the line of advancing Christianity, he placed himself unconsciously at the mercy of a power against which he thought to prevail, and he was struck down by a formidable magnetic flash, doubtless the more instantaneous by reason of the combined effect of cerebral congestion and sunstroke. The conversion of the young Israelite Alphanus of Ratisbon is a contemporary fact which is absolutely of the same nature. We are acquainted with a sect of enthusiasts whom it is common to deride at a distance and to join, despite oneself, as soon as they are approached, even with a hostile intention. I will go further and affirm that magical circles and magnetic currents establish themselves and have an influence, according to fatal flaws, upon those on whom they can act. Each one of us is drawn within a sphere of relations which constitutes his world, and to the influence of which he is made subject. The lawgiver of the French Revolution, that man whom the most spiritual nation in the whole world acknowledged as the incarnation of human reason, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, was drawn into the most lamentable action of his life, the desertion of his children, by the magnetic influence of a libertine circle and a magical current of table d'hôte. He describes it simply and ingenuously in his Confessions, but it is a fact which has remained unobserved. Great circles very often make great men, and vice versa. There are no unrecognized geniuses. There are eccentric men, and the term would seem to have been invented by an adept. The man who is eccentric in his genius is one who attempts to form a circle by combating the central attractive force of established chains and currents. It is his destiny to be broken or to succeed. Now, what is the twofold condition of success in such a case? A central point of stability and a persistent circular action of initiative. The man of genius is one who has discovered a real law and is possessed thereby of an invincible active and directing force. He may die in the midst of his work, but that which he has willed comes to pass in spite of his death, and is indeed often ensured thereby, because death is a veritable assumption for genius. When I shall be lifted up from the earth, said the greatest of the initiators, I will draw all men after me. The law of magnetic currents is that of the movement of the astral light itself, which is always double and augments in a contrary direction. A great action invariably paves the way for a reaction of equal magnitude, and the secret of phenomenal success consists entirely in the foreknowledge of reactions. Thus did Chateaubriand, penetrated with disgust at the Saturnalia of the Revolution, foresee and prepare the immense vogue of his genius of Christianity. To oppose oneself to a current at the beginning of its career is to court being destroyed by that current, like the great and unfortunate Emperor Julian. To oppose oneself to a current which has run its course is to take the lead of a contrary current. The great man is he who comes seasonably and knows how to innovate opportunely. In the days of the apostles, Voltaire would have found no echo for his utterances, and might have been merely an ingenious parasite at the banquets of Trimalcion. Now, at the epoch wherein we live, everything is ripe for a fresh outburst of evangelical zeal and Christian self-devotion, precisely by reason of the prevailing general disillusion, egoistic positivism, and public cynicism of the coarsest interests. The success of certain books and the mystical tendencies of minds are unequivocal symptoms of this widespread disposition. We restore and we build churches only to realize more keenly that we are void of belief, only to long the more for it. Once again does the whole world await its Messiah, and he will not delay his advent. Let a man, for example, come forward who by rank or by fortune is placed in an exalted position, a pope, a king, even a Jewish millionaire, and let this man sacrifice publicly and solemnly all his material interests for the weal of humanity. Let him make himself the savior of the poor, the promulgator and even the victim of doctrines of renunciation and charity, and he will draw around him an immense following. He will accomplish a complete moral revolution in the world. But the high place is before all things necessary for such a personage, because in these days of meanness and trickery, any message issuing from the lower ranks is suspected of interested ambition and imposture. Ye then who are nothing, ye who possess nothing, aspire not to be apostles or messiahs. If you have faith and would act in accordance therewith, get possession in the first place of the means of action, which are the influence of rank and the prestige of fortune. In olden times, gold was manufactured by science. Nowadays, science must be renewed by gold. We have fixed the volatile, and we must now volatilize the fixed. In other words, we have materialized spirit, and we must now spiritualize matter. The most sublime utterance passes unheeded if it goes forth without the guarantee of a name. That is to say, of a success which represents a material value. What is the worth of a manuscript? That of the author's signature among the booksellers. The established reputation known as Alexandre Dumas et Siey represents one of the literary guarantees of our time, but the house of Dumas is in repute only for the romances which are its exclusive productions. Let Dumas devise a magnificent utopia, or discover a splendid solution of the religious problem, and no one will take it seriously, despite the European celebrity of the panurge of modern literature. We are in the age of acquired positions, where everyone is appraised according to his social and commercial standing. Unlimited freedom of speech has produced such a strife of words that no one inquires what is said, but who has said it. If it be a Rothschild, His Holiness Pius IX, or even Monsignor Dupenlow, it is something. But if it be Tartempion, it is nothing. Were he even, which is possible after all, an unrecognized prodigy of genius, knowledge, and good sense. Hence to those who would say to me, if you possess the secret of great successes and of a force which can transform the world, why do you not make use of them? I would answer, this knowledge has come to me too late for myself, and I've spent over its acquisition the time and the resources which might have enabled me to apply it. I offer it to those who are in a position to avail themselves thereof. Illustrious men, rich men, great ones of this world who are dissatisfied with that which you have, who are conscious of a nobler and larger ambition. Will you be fathers of a new world, kings of a rejuvenated civilization? A poor and obscure scholar has found the lever of Archimedes, and he offers it to you for the good of humanity alone, asking nothing whatsoever in exchange. The phenomena which quite recently have perturbed America and Europe, those of table turning and fluidic manifestations, are simply magnetic currents at the beginning of their formation, appeals on the part of nature inviting us, for the good of humanity, to reconstitute great sympathetic and religious chains. As a fact, stagnation in the astral light would mean destruction to the human race, and torpor in this secret agent has already been manifested by alarming symptoms of decomposition and death. For example, cholera morbus, the potato disease, and the blight on the grape are traceable solely to this cause, as the two young shepherds of La Salette saw darkly and symbolically in their dream. The unlooked-for credit which awaited their narrative, and the vast concourse of pilgrims attracted by a statement so singular and at the same time so vague as that of these two children, without instruction and almost without morality, are proofs of the magnetic reality of the fact, and the fluidic tendency of the earth itself to operate the cure of its inhabitants. Superstitions are instinctive, and all that is instinctive is founded in the very nature of things, to which fact the skeptics of all times have given insufficient attention. It follows that we attribute these strange phenomena of table turning to the universal magnetic agent, in search of a chain of enthusiasms with a view to the formation of fresh currents. The force of itself is blind, but can be directed by the will of man and is influenced by prevailing opinions. This universal fluid, if we decide to regard it as a fluid, being the common medium of all nervous organisms and the vehicle of all sensitive vibrations, establishes an actual physical solidarity between impressionable persons, and transmits from one to another the impressions of imagination and of thought. The movement of inert objects, determined by undulations of the universal agent, obeys the ruling impression and reproduces in its revelations at one time all the lucidity of the most wonderful visions, but at another all the eccentricity and falsehood of the most vague and incoherent dreams. The blows resounding on furniture, the clattering of dishes, the auto-playing of musical instruments are illusions produced by the same cause. The miracles of the convulsionaries of Saint Médard were of the same order, and seemed frequently to suspend the laws of nature. On the one hand, exaggeration produced by fascination, which is the special quality of delirium occasioned by congestions of the astral light. On the other, actual oscillations of movements impressed upon inert matter by the subtle and universal agent of motion and life. Such is the sole basis of these occurrences which look so marvelous, as we may demonstrate easily at will by reproducing, in accordance with rules laid down in the ritual, the most astounding of such phenomena, and ascertaining, as can be done quite simply, the absence of trickery, hallucination, or error. It has occurred to me frequently after experiments in the magic chain, performed with persons devoid of good intention or sympathy, that I have been awakened with a start in the night by truly alarming impressions and sensations. On one such occasion, I felt vividly the pressure of an unknown hand attempting to strangle me. I rose up, lighted my lamp, and set calmly to work, seeking to profit by my wakefulness and to drive away the phantoms of sleep. The books about me were moved with considerable noise. Papers were disturbed and rustled one against another. Timber creaked as if on the point of splitting, and heavy blows resounded on the ceiling. With curiosity, but also with tranquility, I observed all these phenomena, which would not have been less wonderful had they been only the product of my imagination. So real did they seem. For the rest, I may state that I was in no sense frightened, and during their occurrence I was engaged upon something quite foreign to the occult sciences. By the repetition of similar phenomena, I was led to attempt an experience of evocation, assisted by the magical ceremonies of the ancients, when I obtained truly astounding results which will be set forth in the 13th chapter of this work. The Great Work. Dicite crux. The great work is, before all things, the creation of man by himself. That is to say, the full and entire conquest of his faculties and his future. It is especially the perfect emancipation of his will, assuring him universal dominion over Azoth and the domain of Magnesia. In other words, full power over the universal magical agent. This agent, disguised by the ancient philosophers under the name of the first matter, determines the forms of modifiable substance, and we can really arrive by means of it at metallic transmutation and the universal medicine. This is not a hypothesis. It is a scientific fact, already established and rigorously demonstrable. Nicholas Flamel and Raymond Lully, both of them poor, indubitably distributed immense riches. Agrippa never proceeded beyond the first part of the great work, and he perished in the attempt, struggling to possess himself and to fix his independence. Now, there are two hermetic operations, the one spiritual, the other material, and these are mutually dependent. For the rest, all hermetic science is contained in the doctrine of Hermes, which is said to have been originally inscribed upon an emerald tablet. Its first articles have already been expounded, and those follow which are concerned with the operation of the great work. Thou shalt separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, gently with great industry. It rises from earth to heaven, and again it descends from heaven to earth, and it receives the power of things above and of things below. By this means shalt thou obtain the glory of the whole world, and all darkness shall depart from thee. It is the strong power of every power, for it will overcome all that is subtle and penetrate all that is solid. Thus was the world created. To separate the subtle from the gross, in the first operation, which is wholly inward, is to liberate the soul from all prejudice and all vice, which is accomplished by the use of philosophical salt, that is to say, wisdom, of mercury, that is, personal skill and application, finally of sulfur, representing vital energy and fire of will. By these are we enabled to change into spiritual gold things which are of all least precious, even the refuse of the earth. In this sense we must interpret the parables of the choir of philosophers, Bernard Trevisan, Basil Valentine, Mary the Egyptian, and other prophets of alchemy. But in their works, as in the great work, we must separate skillfully the subtle from the gross, the mystical from the positive, allegory from theory. If we would read them with profit and understanding, we must take them first of all as allegorical in their entirety, and then descend from allegories to realities by the way of the correspondences or analogies indicated in the one dogma. That which is above is proportional to that which is below, and reciprocally. The word art, when reversed, or read after the manner of sacred and primitive characters from right to left, gives three initials which express the different grades of the great work. T signifies triad, theory, and travail. R, realization. A, adaptation. In the 12th chapter of the ritual, we shall give the processes of adaptation in use among the great masters, especially that which is contained in the Hermetic Fortress of Henry Kunrath. We may refer to our readers also an admirable treatise attributed to Hermes Trismegistus and entitled Minerva Mundi. It is found only in certain editions of Hermes and contains, in allegories full of profundity and poetry, the doctrine of individual self-creation, or the creative law consequent on the harmony between two forces which are termed fixed and volatile by alchemists, and our necessity and liberty in the absolute order. The diversity of the forms which abound in nature is explained in this treatise by the diversity of spirits, and monstrosity by divergence of efforts. Its study and understanding are indispensable for all adepts who would fathom the mysteries of nature and devote themselves seriously to the search after the great work. When the masters in alchemy say that little time and money are needed to accomplish the works of science, above all when they affirm that one vessel is alone needed, when they speak of the great and unique athanor which all can use, which is ready to each man's hand, which all possess without knowing it, they allude to philosophical and moral alchemy. As a fact, the strong and resolute will can arrive in a short time at absolute independence, and we are all in possession of the chemical instrument, the great in soul Athenor, which answers for the separation of the subtle from the gross, and the fixed from the volatile. This instrument, complete as the world and precise as mathematics, is represented by the sages under the emblem of the pentagram or five-pointed star, which is the absolute sign of human intelligence. I will follow the example of the wise by forbearing to name it. It is too easy to divine. The tarot symbol, which corresponds to this chapter, was misconstrued by Court de Ghibelline and Etela, who regarded it as the blunder of a German card maker. It represents a man with his hands bound behind him, having 2 bags of money attached to the armpits and suspended by 1 foot from a gibbet formed by the trunks of 2 trees, each with the stumps of 6 lopped branches, and by a crosspiece, thus completing the figure of the Hebrew Tau full. The legs of the victim are crossed, while his head and elbows form a triangle. Now the triangle surmounted by a cross signifies in alchemy the end and perfection of the great work, a meaning which is identical with that of the letter Tau, the last of the sacred alphabet. This hanged man is consequently the adept, bound by his engagements and spiritualized, that is, having his feet turned towards heaven. He is also the antique Prometheus, expiating by everlasting torture the penalty of his glorious theft. Vulgarly, he is the traitor Judas, and his punishment is a menace to betrayers of the great arcanum. Finally, for Kabbalistic Jews, the hanged man, who corresponds to their 12th dogma, that of the promised Messiah, is a protestation against the Savior acknowledged by Christians, and they seem to say unto him still, "How canst thou save others, since thou couldst not save thyself?" In the Sefer Toldos Jeshu, an anti-Christian rabbinical compilation, there occurs a singular parable. Jeshu, says the rabbinical author of the legend, was traveling with Simon Barjona and Judas Iscariot. Late and weary, they came to a lonely house, and being very hungry, could find nothing to eat except an exceedingly lean gosling. It was insufficient for 3 persons, and to divide it would be to sharpen without satisfying hunger. They agreed to draw lots, but as they were heavy with sleep, "Let us first of all slumber," said Jeshu, "whilst the supper is preparing. When we wake, we will tell our dreams, and he who has had the most beautiful dream shall have the whole gosling to his own share." So it was arranged. They slept and they woke. "As for me," said St. Peter, "I dreamed that I was the vicar of God." "And I," said Jeshu, "that I was God himself." "For me," said Judas hypocritically, "I dreamed that, being in somnambulism, I arose, went softly downstairs, took the gosling from the spit, and ate it." Thereupon they also went down, but the gosling had vanished altogether. Judas had a waking dream. This anecdote is given not in the text of the Sefer Toldos Jeshu itself, but in the rabbinical commentaries on that work. The legend is a protest of Jewish positivism against Christian mysticism. As a fact, while the faithful surrendered themselves to magnificent dreams, the proscribed Israelite, Judas of the Christian civilization, worked, sold, intrigued, became rich, possessed himself of this life's realities, till he became in a position to advance the means of existence to those very forms of worship which had so long outlawed him. The ancient worshippers of the Ark remained true to the cultus of the strongbox. The exchange is now their temple, and thence they govern the Christian world. The laugh is indeed with Judas, who can congratulate himself upon not having slept like St. Peter. In archaic writings preceding the captivity, the Hebrew Tau was cruciform, which confirms further our interpretation of the 12th symbol of the Kabbalistic tarot. The cross, which produces 4 triangles, is also the sacred sign of the duodenary, and on this account it was called the key of heaven by the Egyptians. So Atela, confused by his protracted researches for the conciliation of the analogical necessities of this symbol with his own personal opinion, in which he was influenced by the erudite Court de Ghibelline, placed in the hand of his upright hanged man by him interpreted as Prudence, a hermetic caduceus formed by 2 serpents and a Greek Tau. Seeing that he understood the necessity of the Tau or cross on the 12th leaf of the Book of Thoth, he should have seen also the manifold and magnificent meaning of the hermetic hanged man, the Prometheus of science, the living man who touches earth by his thought alone, whose firm ground is heaven, the free and immolated adept, the revealer menaced with death, the conjuration of Judaism against Christ, which seems to be an involuntary admission of the secret divinity of the crucified, and lastly, the sign of the work accomplished, the cycle terminated, the intermediary Tau, which resumes for the first time, before the final denary, the signs of the sacred alphabet. Necromancy. Ex ipsis mors. We have said that the images of persons and things are preserved in the astral light. Therein also can be evoked the forms of those who are in our world no longer, and by this means are accomplished those mysteries of necromancy, which are so contested and at the same time so real. The Kabbalists who have discoursed concerning the world of spirits have described simply what they have seen in their evocations. Eliphas, Levi, Zahid, who writes this book, has evoked, and he has seen. Let us state in the first place that the masters have written on their visions or intuitions in that which they term the light of glory. We read in the Hebrew book concerning the revolution of souls that there are 3 classes of souls: the daughters of Adam, the daughters of angels, and the daughters of sin. According to the same work, there are also 3 kinds of spirits: captive, wandering, and free. Souls are sent forth in couples. At the same time, certain souls of men are born widowed, for their spouses are held captive by Lilith and Nerna, queens of the Stygians. They are souls condemned to expiate the temerity of a celibate's vow. Hence, when a man renounces the love of women from his infancy, he makes the bride who was destined for him a slave to the demons of debauch. Souls grow and multiply in heaven, as bodies do upon earth. Immaculate souls are the daughters of the kisses of angels. Nothing can enter heaven save that which comes from heaven. Hence, after death, the divine spirit, which animated man, ascends by itself above and leaves 2 corpses below, one upon earth, the other in the atmosphere, one terrestrial and elementary, the other aerial and sidereal, one already inert, the other still animated by the universal movement of the soul of the world, yet destined to die slowly, absorbed by the astral forces which produced it. The terrestrial body is visible, the other is unseen by the eyes of earthly and living bodies, nor can it be beheld except by the application of the astral light to the translucid, which conveys its impressions to the nervous system and thus influences the organ of sight, so that it perceives the forms which are preserved and the words which are written in the book of vital light. When a man has lived well, the astral body evaporates like a pure incense ascending towards the superior regions. But should he have lived in sin, his astral body, which holds him prisoner, still seeks the object of its passions and wishes to return to life. It torments the dreams of young girls, bathes in the stream of spilt blood, and floats about the places where the pleasures of its life elapsed. It watches over treasures which it possessed and buried. It expends itself in painful efforts to make fresh material organs and so live again. But the stars draw it up and absorb it. It feels its intelligence weaken. Its memory gradually vanishes. All its being dissolves. Its former vices rise up before it, assume monstrous shapes and pursue it. They attack and devour it. The unfortunate creature thus loses successively all the members which have ministered to his iniquities. Then he dies a second time and forever, because he loses his personality and his memory. Souls which are destined to live but are not yet purified completely remain captive for a longer or shorter period in the astral body, wherein they are burned by the odic light, which seeks to absorb and dissolve them. It is in order to escape from this body that suffering souls sometimes enter the organisms of the living, and dwell therein in that state which Kabbalists term embryonic. Now it is in these aerial bodies, which are evoked by necromancy. We enter into communion with larvae, with dead or perishing substances by this operation. The beings in question, for the most part, cannot speak, except by a ringing in our ears produced by the nervous shock to which I have referred, and commonly they can reason only by reflecting our thoughts and our reveries. To behold these strange forms, we must put ourselves in an abnormal condition akin to sleep or death. In other words, we must magnetize ourselves and enter into a kind of lucid and waking somnambulism. Then necromancy has real results, and the evocations of magic can produce actual visions. We have said that in the great magical agent, which is the astral light, there are preserved all impressions of things, all images formed either by rays or reflections. In this same light our dreams come to us. It is this which befools the insane and misguides their dormant judgment in pursuit of the most bizarre phantoms. To ensure vision without illusion in such light, a powerful will must help us to isolate reflections and attract rays only. To dream awake is to see in the astral light, and the orgies of the Sabbath, described by so many sorcerers in their criminal trials, came to them solely in this manner. The preparations and the substances used to obtain this result were often horrible, as we shall see in the ritual, but the result itself was never doubtful. They saw, they heard, they handled the most abominable, most fantastic, most impossible things. We shall return to this subject in our 15th chapter. At the present moment, we are concerned only with the evocation of the dead. In the spring of the year 1854, I had undertaken a journey to London, that I might escape from internal disquietude and devote myself without interruption to science. I had letters of introduction to persons of eminence who were anxious for revelations from the supernatural world. I made the acquaintance of several and discovered in them, amidst much that was courteous, a depth of indifference or trifling. They asked me forthwith to work wonders as if I were a charlatan, and I was somewhat discouraged, for, to speak frankly, far from being inclined to initiate others into the mysteries of ceremonial magic, I had shrunk all along from its illusions and weariness. Moreover, such ceremonies necessitated an equipment which would be expensive and hard to collect. I buried myself, therefore, in the study of the Transcendent Kabbalah, and troubled no further about English adepts, when, returning one day to my hotel, I found a note awaiting me. This note contained half of a card, divided transversely, on which I recognized at once the seal of Solomon. It was accompanied by a small sheet of paper on which these words were penciled. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock in front of Westminster Abbey, the second half of this card will be given you. I kept this curious assignation. At the appointed spot I found a carriage drawn up, and as I held unaffectedly the fragment of card in my hand, a footman approached, making a sign as he did so, and then opened the door of the equipage. It contained a lady in black, wearing a thick veil. She motioned to me to take a seat beside her, showing me at the same time the other half of the card. The door closed, the carriage drove off, and the lady raising her veil, I saw that my appointment was with an elderly person, having gray eyebrows and black eyes of unusual brilliance, strangely fixed in expression. "Sir," she began with a strongly marked English accent, "I am aware that the law of secrecy is rigorous amongst adepts. A friend of Sir B.L., who has seen you, knows that you have been asked for phenomena, and that you have refused to gratify such curiosity. You are possibly without the materials. I should like to show you a complete magical cabinet, but I must exact beforehand the most inviolable silence. If you will not give me this pledge upon your honor, I shall give orders for you to be driven to your hotel." I made the required promise and keep it faithfully by not divulging the name, position, or abode of this lady, whom I soon recognized as an initiate, not exactly of the first order, but still of a most exalted grade. We had a number of long conversations, in the course of which she insisted always upon the necessity of practical experience to complete initiation. She showed me a collection of magical vestments and instruments, lent me some rare books which I needed. In short, she determined me to attempt at her house the experiment of a complete evocation, for which I prepared during a period of 21 days, scrupulously observing the rules laid down in the 13th chapter of the ritual. The preliminaries terminated on 24th of July. It was proposed to evoke the phantom of the divine Apollonius and interrogate it upon two secrets, one which concerned myself and one which interested the lady. She had counted on taking part in the evocation with a trustworthy person, who, however, proved nervous at the last moment, and as the triad or unity is indispensable for magical rites, I was left to my own resources. The cabinet prepared for the evocation was situated in a turret. It contained 4 concave mirrors and a species of altar having a white marble top, encircled by a chain of magnetized iron. The sign of the pentagram, as given in the 5th chapter of this work, was graven and gilded on the white marble surface. It was inscribed also in various colors upon a new white lambskin stretched beneath the altar. In the middle of the marble table there was a small copper chafing dish, containing charcoal of alder and laurel wood. Another chafing dish was set before me on a tripod. I was clothed in a white garment, very similar to the alb of our Catholic priests, but longer and wider, and I wore upon my head a crown of vervain leaves, intertwined with a golden chain. I held a new sword in one hand, and in the other the ritual. I kindled 2 fires with the requisite prepared substances, and began reading the evocations of the ritual in a voice at first low, but rising by degrees. The smoke spread, the flame caused the objects upon which it fell to waver, and then it went out, the smoke still floating white and slow about the marble altar. I seemed to feel a quaking of the earth. My ears tingled, my heart beat quickly. I heaped more twigs and perfumes on the chafing dishes, and as the flame again burst up, I beheld distinctly before the altar the figure of a man more than normal size, which dissolved and vanished away. I recommenced the evocations and placed myself within a circle which I had drawn previously between the tripod and the altar. Thereupon the mirror which was behind the altar seemed to brighten in its depth. A wan form was outlined therein, which increased and seemed to approach by degrees. 3 times, with closed eyes, I invoked Apollonius. When I again looked forth, there was a man in front of me, wrapped from head to foot in a species of shroud, which seemed more gray than white. He was lean, melancholy, and beardless, and did not altogether correspond to my preconceived notion of Apollonius. I experienced an abnormally cold sensation, and when I endeavored to question the phantom, I could not articulate a syllable. I therefore placed my hand upon the sign of the pentagram, and pointed the sword at the figure, commanding it mentally to obey and not alarm me in virtue of the said sign. The form thereupon became vague and suddenly disappeared. I directed it to return, and presently felt, as it were, a breath close by me. Something touched my hand which was holding the sword, and the arm became immediately benumbed as far as the elbow. I divined that the sword displeased the spirit, and I therefore placed it point downwards close by me within the circle. The human figure reappeared immediately, but I experienced such an intense weakness in all my limbs, and a swooning sensation came so quickly over me, that I made 2 steps to sit down, whereupon I fell into a profound lethargy, accompanied by dreams, of which I had only a confused recollection when I came again to myself. For several subsequent days my arm remained benumbed and painful. The apparition did not speak to me, but it seemed that the questions I had designed to ask answered themselves in my mind. To that of the lady an interior voice replied, "Death." It was concerning a man about whom she desired information. As for myself, I sought to know whether reconciliation and forgiveness were possible between 2 persons who occupied my thoughts, and the same inexorable echo within me answered, "Dead." I am stating facts as they occurred, but I would impose faith on no one. The consequence of this experience on myself must be called inexplicable. I was no longer the same man. Something of another world had passed into me. I was no longer either sad or cheerful, but I felt a singular attraction towards death, unaccompanied, however, by any suicidal tendency. I analyzed my experience carefully, and notwithstanding a lively nervous repugnance, I repeated the same experiment on 2 further occasions, allowing some days to lapse between each. There was not, however, sufficient difference between the phenomena to warrant me in protracting a narrative which is perhaps already too long. But the net result of these 2 additional evocations was for me the revelation of 2 Kabbalistic secrets which might change, in a short space of time, the foundations and laws of society at large, if they came to be known generally. Am I to conclude from all this that I really evoked, saw, and touched the great Apollonius of Tyana? I am not so hallucinated as to affirm, or so unserious as to believe it. The effect of the preparations, the perfumes, the mirrors, the pentacles, is an actual drunkenness of the imagination, which must act powerfully upon a person otherwise nervous and impressionable. I do not explain the physical laws by which I saw and touched. I affirm solely that I did see and that I did touch, that I saw clearly and distinctly apart from dreaming, and this is sufficient to establish the real efficacy of magical ceremonies. For the rest, I regard the practice as destructive and dangerous. If it became habitual, neither moral nor physical health would be able to withstand it. The elderly lady whom I have mentioned, and of whom I had reason to complain subsequently, was a case in point. Despite her asseverations to the contrary, I have no doubt that she was addicted to necromancy and Goetia. At times she talked complete nonsense, at others yielded to senseless fits of passion, for which it was difficult to discover a cause. I left London without bidding her adieu, and I adhere faithfully to my engagement by giving no clue to her identity, which might connect her name with practices, pursued in all probability without the knowledge of her family, which I believe to be numerous and of very honorable position. There are evocations of intelligence, evocations of love, and evocations of hate. But, once more, there is no proof whatsoever that spirits leave the higher spheres to communicate with us. The opposite, as a fact, is more probable. We evoke the memories which they have left in the astral light, or common reservoir of universal magnetism. It was in this light that the Emperor Julian once saw the gods manifest, looking old, ill, and decrepit. A fresh proof of the influence exercised by current and accredited opinions on the reflections of this same magical agent, which makes our tables talk and answers by taps on the walls. After the evocation I have described, I reread carefully the life of Apollonius, who is represented by historians as an ideal of antique beauty and elegance, and I remarked that towards the end of his life he was starved and tortured in prison. This circumstance, which remained perhaps in my memory without my being aware of it, may have determined the unattractive form of my vision, the latter regarded solely as the voluntary dream of a waking man. I have seen two other persons, whom there is no occasion to name, both differing as regards costume and appearance from what I had expected. For the rest, I commend the greatest caution to all who propose undertaking similar experiences. The result is intense exhaustion and frequently a shock sufficient to occasion illness. I must not conclude this chapter without mentioning the curious opinions of certain Kabbalists who distinguish between apparent and real death, holding that the two are seldom simultaneous. In their view, the majority of persons who are buried are still alive, while a number of others who are regarded as living are in reality dead. Incurable madness, for example, would be with them in incomplete but real death, leaving the earthly form under the purely instinctive control of the sidereal body. When the human soul suffers a greater strain than it can bear, it would thus become separated from the body, leaving the animal soul or sidereal body in its place, and these human remains would be less alive in a sense than a mere animal. Dead persons of this kind are said to be identified by the complete extinction of the moral and affectionate sense. They are neither bad nor good. They are dead. Such beings, who are poisonous fungi of the human race, absorb the life of living beings to their fullest possible extent, and this is why their proximity depletes the soul and chills the heart. If such corpse-like creatures really existed, they would stand for all that was recounted in former times about brucolacs and vampires. Now, are there not certain persons in whose presence one feels less intelligent, less good, sometimes even less honest? Are there not some whose vicinity extinguishes all faith and all enthusiasm, who draw you by your weaknesses, who govern you by your evil propensities, and make you die slowly to morality in a torment like that of Mezentius? These are dead people whom we mistake for living beings. These are vampires whom we regard as friends. Transmutations. Sphera lunae sempiternum exilium. St. Augustine questions seriously whether Apuleius could have been changed into an ass by a Thessalian sorceress, and theologians have long debated about the transformation of Nebuchadnezzar into a wild beast, which things merely prove that the eloquent doctor of Hippo was unacquainted with magical secrets, and that the theologians in question were not advanced far in exegesis. We are concerned in this chapter with different and far more incredible marvels, which are at the same time incontestable. I refer to lycanthropy, or the nocturnal transformation of men into wolves, long celebrated in country tales of the twilight by the histories of werewolves. These accounts are so well attested that, with a view to their explanation, skeptical science has recourse to furious mania masquerading as animals. But such hypotheses are puerile and account for nothing. Let us turn elsewhere for the secret of the phenomena which have been observed on this subject, and begin with establishing 1. That no person has ever been killed by a werewolf except by suffocation, without effusion of blood and without wounds. 2. That werewolves, though tracked, pursued, and even maimed, have never been killed on the spot. 3. That persons suspected of these transformations have always been found at home after a werewolf chase, more or less broken up, sometimes dying, but invariably in their natural form. Let us next establish phenomena of a different order. Nothing in the world is better borne out by evidence than the visible and real presence of P. Alphonsus Ligori beside the dying Pope, whilst the same personage was simultaneously seen at home, far from Rome, in prayer and ecstasy. Further, the simultaneous presence of the missionary Francis Xavier in several places at once has been no less strictly demonstrated. It will be said that these are miracles, but we reply that miracles, when they are genuine, are simply facts for science. Apparitions of persons dear to us, coincidentally with the moment of their death, are phenomena of the same order and attributable to the same cause. We have spoken of the sidereal body, which is intermediary between the soul and the physical envelope. Now this body frequently remains awake while the latter sleeps, and passes in thought through all space, which universal magnetism opens before it. It lengthens without breaking this sympathetic chain which attaches it to our heart and brain, and it is for this reason that it is so dangerous to awaken dreamers suddenly. As a fact, too great a start may break the bond in an instant and cause immediate death. The form of our sidereal body is in correspondence with the habitual condition of our thoughts, and it modifies in the long run the characteristics of the material body. That is why Swedenborg, in his somnambulistic intuitions, frequently beheld spirits in the shape of various animals. Let us now make bold to say that a werewolf is nothing else but the sidereal body of a man whose savage and sanguinary instincts are typified by the wolf, who further, whilst his phantom wanders over the country, is sleeping painfully in his head and dreams that he is a wolf indeed. What makes the werewolf visible is the almost somnambulistic excitement caused by the fright of those who behold it, or else the tendency, more particularly in simple country persons, to enter into direct communication with the astral light, which is the common medium of visions and dreams. The hurts inflicted on the werewolf do actually wound the sleeping person by an otic and sympathetic congestion of the astral light, and by correspondence between the immaterial and material body. Many persons will believe that they are dreaming when they read such things as these, and may ask whether we are really awake ourselves, but we need only request men of science to reflect upon the phenomena of gestation and upon the influence of the imagination of women on the form of their offspring. A woman who had been present at the execution of a man who was broken on the wheel gave birth to a child with all its limbs shattered. Let anyone tell us how the impression produced upon the soul of the mother by a horrible spectacle could so have reacted on the child, and we will explain in turn why blows received in dreams can bruise and even wound grievously the body of him who receives them in imagination, above all when that body is suffering and subjected to nervous and magnetic influences. To such phenomena, and to the occult laws which govern them, must be referred the effects of bewitchment, of which we shall speak hereafter. Diabolical obsessions and the majority of nervous diseases which affect the brain are wounds inflicted on the nervous mechanism by perverted astral light, meaning that which is absorbed or projected in abnormal proportions. All extraordinary and extranatural tensions of will predispose to obsessions and nervous diseases. Enforced celibacy, asceticism, hatred, ambition, rejected love are so many generative principles of infernal forms and influences. Paracelsus says that the menstruations of women beget phantoms in the air, and from this standpoint convents would be seminaries for nightmares, while the devils might be compared to those heads of the Hydra of Lerna which were reproduced eternally and propagated in the very blood from their wounds. The phenomena of possession amongst the Ursulines of Loudun, so fatal to urban grandeur, have been misconstrued. The nuns in reality were possessed by hysteria and fanatical imitation of the secret thoughts of their exorcists, these being transmitted to their nervous system by the astral light. They experienced an impression of all the hatreds which this unfortunate priest had conjured up against him, and such holy interior communications seemed diabolical and miraculous to themselves. Hence, in this tragical affair, everyone acted sincerely, even to Laubard de Mon, who, in his blind execution of the prejudged verdicts of Cardinal Richelieu, believed that he was fulfilling the duties of a true judge, and as little suspected himself of being a follower of Pontius Pilate as he would have recognized in the skeptical and libertine cure of Saint Pierre du Moche, a disciple and martyr of Christ. The possession of the nuns of Louvière is scarcely more than a copy of those of Loudun. Devils invent little and plagiarize one another. The process of Gaufridi and Magdalene de la Palude. The process of Gaufridi and Magdalene de la Palude possesses stranger features, for in this case the victims were their own accusers. Gaufridi confessed that he was guilty of depriving a number of women of the power to defend themselves against his seductions by simply breathing in their nostrils. A young and beautiful girl of noble family, who had been thus insufflated, described in the greatest detail scenes wherein lubricity seemed to vie with the monstrous and grotesque. Such are the ordinary hallucinations of false mysticism and infringed celibacy. Gaufridi and his mistress were obsessed by their mutual chimeras, and the brain of the one reflected the nightmares of the other. Was not the Marquis de Sade himself infectious for certain depleted and diseased natures? The scandalous trial of Father Gerard is a fresh proof of the deliriums of mysticism and singular nervous affections which it may entail. The trances of La Catière, her ecstasies, her stigmata, were all as real as the insensate and perhaps involuntary debauchery of her director. She accused him when he wished to withdraw from her, and the conversion of this young woman was a revenge, for there is nothing more cruel than depraved passions. An influential society which intervened in the trial of grandeur for the destruction of the possible heretic, in this case rescued Father Gerard for the honor of the order. Moreover, Grandier and Gerard attained the same results by very different means, with which we shall be concerned specially in the 16th chapter. We act by our imagination on the imagination of others, by our sidereal body on theirs, by our organs on their organs, in such a way that through sympathy, whether of inclination or obsession, we possess one another reciprocally and identify ourselves with those whom we wish to affect. Reactions against such dominations may cause the most pronounced antipathy to succeed the liveliest sympathy. Love has a tendency to unify beings. In thus identifying, it renders them rivals frequently, and hence enemies if in the depth of the two natures there is some unsociable disposition like pride. To fill two united souls with pride in an equal degree is to disjoin them by making them rivals. Antagonism is the necessary consequence of a plurality of gods. When we dream of any living person, either his sidereal body presents itself to ours in the astral light, or at least a reflection thereof, and our impressions at the meeting may often make known his secret dispositions in our regard. For example, love fashions the sidereal body of the one in the image and the likeness of the other, so that the psychic medium of the woman is like a man, and that of the man like a woman. It was this transfer which the Kabbalists sought to express in an occult manner when they said, in explanation of an obscure passage in Genesis, God created love by placing a rib of Adam in the breast of the woman and a portion of the flesh of Eve in the breast of the man, so that at the bottom of woman's heart there is the bone of man, while at the bottom of man's heart there is the flesh of woman. An allegory which is certainly not devoid of depth and beauty. We have referred in the previous chapter to what the masters in Kabbalah call the embryonic condition of souls. This state, completed after the death of the person who thereby possesses another, is commenced often in life, whether by obsession or by love. I knew a young woman whose parents inspired her with a great terror, who began suddenly to inflict upon an inoffensive person the very acts she dreaded in them. I knew another who, after participating in an evocation concerned with a guilty woman suffering in the next world for certain eccentric acts, began to imitate without any reason the peculiarities of the dead person. To this occult influence must be attributed the terrible power of a parent's curse, which is feared by all nations on earth, as also the imminent danger of magical operations when anyone has not reached the isolation of true adepts. This virtue of sidereal transmutation, which really exists in love, explains the allegorical marvels of the wand of Circe. Apuleius speaks of a Thessalian woman who changed herself into a bird. He won the affections of her servant to discover the secrets of the mistress, but succeeded only in transforming himself into an ass. This allegory contains the most hidden secrets of love. Again, the Kabbalists say that when a man falls in love with a female elementary, undine, sylphide, or nomide, as the case may be, she becomes immortal with him, or otherwise he dies with her. We have seen already that elementaries are imperfect and as yet mortal men. The revelation we have mentioned, which has been regarded merely as a fable, is therefore the dogma of moral solidarity in love, which is itself the foundation of love, explaining all its sanctity and all its power. Who then is this Circe that changes her worshippers into swine, while so soon as she is subjected to the bond of love, her enchantments are destroyed? She is the ancient courtesan, the marble-hearted woman of all the ages. She who is without love absorbs and degrades all who approach her. She who loves, on the other hand, diffuses enthusiasm, nobility, and life. There was much talk in the last century about an adept accused of charlatanism, who was termed in his lifetime the divine Cagliostro. It is known that he practiced evocations, and that in this art he was surpassed only by the illuminated Schröpfer. It is said also that he boasted of his power in binding sympathies, and that he claimed to be in possession of the secret of the great work, but that which rendered him still more famous was a certain elixir of life, which immediately restored to the aged the strength and vitality of youth. The basis of this composition was Malvoisie wine, and it was obtained by distilling the sperm of certain animals with the sap of certain plants. We are in possession of the recipe, but our reasons for withholding it will be understood readily. Black Magic. Samael Auxiliator. We approach the mystery of black magic. We are about to confront, even in his own sanctuary, the black god of the Sabbath, the formidable goat of Mendes. At this point, those who are liable to fear should close the book. Even persons who are a prey to nervous impressions will do well to divert their attention or to abstain. We have undertaken a task and we must complete it. Let us first of all address ourselves frankly and boldly to the questions: is there a devil? What is the devil? As to the first point, science is silent. Philosophy denies it at hazard. Religion only answers in the affirmative. As to the second point, religion states that the devil is the fallen angel. Occult philosophy accepts and explains this definition. It will be unnecessary to repeat what we have said previously on the subject, but we may add a further revelation. In black magic, the devil is the great magical agent employed for evil purposes by a perverse will. The old serpent of the legend is nothing else than the universal agent, the eternal fire of terrestrial life, the soul of the earth and the living center of hell. We have said that the astral light is the receptacle of forms, and these, when evoked by reason, are produced harmoniously, but when evoked by madness, they appear disordered and monstrous. So originated the nightmares of Saint Anthony and the phantoms of the Sabbath. Do therefore the evocations of Goetia and demonomania produce a practical result? Yes, certainly, one which cannot be contested, one more terrible than could ever be recounted in legends. When anyone invokes the devil with intentional ceremonies, the devil comes and is seen. To escape dying from horror at that sight, to escape catalepsy or idiocy, one must already be mad. Grandier was a libertine through indevotion and perhaps also through skepticism. Excessive zeal following on the aberrations of asceticism and blindness of faith depraved Gerard and made him deprave in his turn. In the 15th chapter of our ritual, we shall give all the diabolical evocations and practices of black magic, not that they may be used, but that they may be known and judged, and that such insanities may be put aside forever. M. Eudes de Miauville, whose book upon table turning made a certain sensation recently, will be contented possibly and discontented at the same time with the solution here given of black magic and its problems. As a fact, we maintain, like himself, the reality and prodigious nature of the facts, but with him also we assign them to the old serpent, the occult prince of this world. But we are not agreed as to the nature of this blind agent, which under different leadership is the instrument of all good or of all evil, the minister of prophets or the inspirer of pythonesses. In a word, the devil for us is force placed temporarily at the disposal of evil, even as mortal sin is, to our thinking, the persistence of the will in what is absurd. M. de Miauville is therefore 1,000 times right, but he is once and one great time wrong. Whatsoever is arbitrary must be excluded from the realm of things positive. Nothing happens by chance, nor yet by the autocracy of a good or evil will. There are two houses in heaven, and the tribunal of Satan is restrained in its extremes by the senate of divine wisdom. Bewitchments. Fons oculis fulgur. When a man gazes unchastely upon any woman, he profanes that woman, said the great master. What is willed with persistence is done. Every real will is confirmed by acts. Every will confirmed by an act is an action. Every action is subject to a judgment, and such judgment is eternal. These are dogmas and principles from which it follows that the good or evil which we will to others as to ourselves, according to the capacity of our will and within the sphere of our operation, must take place infallibly if the will be confirmed and the determination fixed by acts. Such acts should be analogous to the will. The intent to do harm or to excite love, in order to be efficacious, must be confirmed by deeds of hatred or affection. Whatsoever bears the impression of a human soul belongs to that soul. Whatsoever a man has appropriated after any manner becomes his body in the broader acception of the term, and anything which is done to the body of a man is felt mediately or immediately by his soul. It is for this reason that every hostile deed committed against one's neighbor is regarded in moral theology as the beginning of homicide. Bewitchment is a homicide, and the more infamous because it eludes self-defense by the victim and punishment by law. This principle being established to exonerate our conscience and for the warning of weak vessels, let us affirm boldly that bewitchment is possible. Let us even go further and lay down that it is not only possible, but in some sense necessary and fatal. It is going on continually in the social world, unconsciously both to agents and patients. Involuntary bewitchment is one of the most terrible dangers of human life. Passional sympathy inevitably subjects the most ardent desire to the strongest will. Moral maladies are more contagious than physical, and there are some triumphs of infatuation and fashion which are comparable to leprosy or cholera. We may die of an evil acquaintance as well as of a contagious touch, and the frightful plague which, during recent centuries only, has avenged in Europe the profanation of the mysteries of love, is a revelation of the analogical laws of nature, and at the same time offers only a feeble image of the moral corruptions which follow daily on unequivocal sympathy. There is a story of a jealous and infamous man who, to avenge himself on a rival, contracted an incurable disorder, and made it the common scourge and anathema of a divided bed. This atrocious history is that of every magician, or rather of every sorcerer who practices bewitchments. He poisons himself in order that he may poison others. He damns himself that he may torture others. He draws in hell with his breath in order that he may expel it by his lungs. He wounds himself mortally that he may inflict death on others, but possessed of this unhappy courage, it is positive and certain that he will poison and slay by the mere projection of his perverse will. There are some forms of love which are as deadly as hatred, and the bewitchments of goodwill are the torment of the wicked. The prayers offered to God for the conversion of a man bring misfortune to that man if he will not repent. As we have said, it is weariness and danger to strive against the fluidic currents stirred up by chains of wills in union. Hence there are two kinds of bewitchment, voluntary and involuntary. Physical and moral bewitchment may be distinguished in like manner. Power attracts power, life attracts life, health attracts health. This is a law of nature. If two children live, above all if they sleep together, and if one be weak while the other is strong, the strong will absorb the weak, and the latter will waste away. For this reason, it is important that children should always sleep alone. In conventual seminaries, certain pupils absorb the intelligence of the others, and in every given circle of men, one individual emerges who avails himself of the wills of the rest. Bewitchment by means of currents is exceedingly common. As we have observed already, morally as well as physically, most of us are carried away by the crowd. What, however, we have proposed to exhibit, more especially in this chapter, is the almost absolute power of the human will upon the determination of its acts, and the influence of every outward demonstration of will upon outward things. Voluntary bewitchments are still frequent in our rural places because natural forces, among ignorant and isolated persons, operate unreduced by any doubt or any diversion. A frank, absolute hatred, unleavened by rejected passion or personal cupidity, is, under certain given conditions, a death sentence for its object. I say unmixed with amorous passion or cupidity, because a desire, being an attraction, counterbalances and annuls the power of projection. For example, a jealous person will never efficaciously bewitch his rival, and a greedy heir will never by the mere fact of his will succeed in shortening the days of a miserly and long-lived uncle. Bewitchments attempted under such conditions reflect upon the operator and help rather than hurt their object, setting him free from a hostile action which destroys itself by unmeasured exaggeration. The term invotement, bewitchment, so strong in its Gaelic simplicity, expresses admirably what it means, the act of enveloping someone, so to speak, in a formulated will. The instrument of bewitchments is the great magical agent, which, under the influence of an evil will, becomes really and positively the demon. Witchcraft, properly so called, that is, ceremonial operation with intent to bewitch, acts only on the operator, and serves to fix and confirm his will, by formulating it with persistence and travail, the two conditions which make volition efficacious. The more difficult or horrible the operation, the greater is its power, because it acts more strongly on the imagination and confirms effort in direct ratio of resistance. This explains the bizarre nature and even atrocious character of the operations in black magic, as practiced by the ancients and in the Middle Ages, the diabolical masses, administration of sacraments to reptiles, effusions of blood, human sacrifices, and other monstrosities, which are the very essence and reality of Goetia or nigromancy. Such are the practices which from all time have brought down upon sorcerers the just repression of the laws. Black magic is really only a graduated combination of sacrileges and murders designed for the permanent perversion of a human will, and for the realization in a living man of the hideous phantom of the demon. It is, therefore, properly speaking, the religion of the devil, the cultus of darkness, hatred of good carried to the height of paroxysm. It is the incarnation of death and the persistent creation of hell. The Kabbalist Bodin, who has been considered erroneously of a feeble and superstitious mind, had no other motive in writing his Demonomania than that of warning people against dangerous incredulity. Initiated by the study of the Kabbalah into the true secrets of magic, he trembled at the danger to which society was exposed by the abandonment of this power to the wickedness of man. Hence he attempted what at the present time M. Eudes de Mirville is attempting amongst ourselves. He gathered facts without interpreting them and affirmed in the face of inattentive or preoccupied science the existence of the occult influences and criminal operations of evil magic. In his own day, Bodin attracted no more attention than will be given to M. Eudes de Mirville, because it is not enough to enumerate phenomena and to prejudge their cause if we would influence serious people. We must study, explain, and demonstrate such cause, and this is precisely what we are ourselves attempting. Will better success crown our own efforts? It is possible to die through the love of certain people, even as by their hate. There are absorbing passions under the breath of which we feel ourselves depleted like the spouses of vampires. Not only do the wicked torment the good, but unconsciously the good torture the wicked. The gentleness of Abel was a long and painful bewitchment for the ferocity of Cain. Among evil men, the hatred of good originates in the very instinct of self-preservation. Moreover, they deny that what torments them is good, and are driven to deify and justify evil for their own peace. In the sight of Cain, Abel was a hypocrite and coward who abused the pride of humanity by scandalous submissions to divinity. How much must this first murderer have endured before making such a frightful attack upon his brother? Had Abel understood, he would have been afraid. Antipathy is the presentiment of a possible bewitchment, either of love or hatred, for we find love frequently succeeding repulsion. The astral light warns us of coming influences by its action on the more or less sensible, more or less active nervous system. Instantaneous sympathies, electric loves, are explosions of the astral light, which are as exactly and mathematically demonstrable as the discharge of strong magnetic batteries. Thereby we may see what unexpected dangers threaten an uninitiated person who is perpetually fooling with fire in the neighborhood of unseen powder magazines. We are saturated with the astral light, and we project it unceasingly to make room for and to attract fresh supplies. The nervous instruments which are specially designed either for attraction or projection are the eyes and hands. The polarity of the hand is resident in the thumb, and hence, according to the magical tradition which still lingers in rural places, whenever anyone is in suspicious company, he should keep the thumb doubled up and hidden in the hand, and while in the main avoiding a fixed glance at anyone, still being the first to look at those whom we have reason to fear, so as to escape unexpected fluidic projections and fascinating regards. There are certain animals which have the power of breaking the currents of astral light by an absorption peculiar to themselves. They are violently antipathetic to us and possess a certain sorcery of the eye. The toad, the basilisk, and the tard are instances. These animals, when tamed and carried alive on the person or kept in one's rooms, are a guarantee against the hallucinations and trickeries of astral intoxication, a term made use of here for the first time, and one which explains all phenomena of unbridled passions, mental exaltations, and folly. Tame toads and tards, my dear sir, the disciple of Voltaire will say to me, carry them about with you, but write no more. To which I may answer that I shall think seriously of doing so if I ever feel tempted to laugh at anything of which I am ignorant, or to treat those whose knowledge and wisdom I fail to understand as fools or madmen. Paracelsus, the greatest of the Christian magi, opposed bewitchment by the practices of a contrary bewitchment. He devised sympathetic remedies and applied them, not to the suffering members, but to representations of these, formed and consecrated according to magical ceremonial. His successes were incredible, for never has any physician approached Paracelsus in his marvels of healing. But Paracelsus arrived at magnetism long before Mesmer, and had carried to its final consequences this luminous discovery, or rather this initiation into the magic of the ancients, who better than us understood the great magical agent and did not regard the astral light, azoth, the universal magnesia of the pages, as a special animal fluid emanating only from a few secular creatures. In his occult philosophy, Paracelsus opposes ceremonial magic, the terrible power of which he did not certainly ignore, but he sought to decry its practices so as to discredit black magic. He locates the omnipotence of the magus in the interior and the cold magnes, and the most skillful magnetizers of their own day could not express themselves better. At the same time, he counseled the employment of magical symbols, talismans above all, in the cure of diseases. In our 18th chapter, we shall have occasion to return to the talismans of Paracelsus, while following Gaffarel upon the great question of occult iconography and numismatics. Bewitchment may be cured also by substitution, when that is possible, and by the rupture or deflection of the astral current. The folk traditions on all these points are admirable and undoubtedly of remote antiquity. They are remnants of the teaching of Druids who were initiated in the mysteries of Egypt and India by watching hierophants. Now it is well known in vulgar magic that a bewitchment, that is, a determined will resolved on doing evil, invariably has its result, and cannot draw back without risk of death. The sorcerer who liberates anyone from a charm must have another object for his malevolence, or it is certain that he himself will be smitten, and will perish as the victim of his own spells. The astral movement being circular, every azotic or magnetic emission which does not encounter its medium returns with force to its point of departure, thus explaining one of the strangest histories in a sacred book, that of the demons sent into the swine, which thereupon cast themselves into the sea. This act of high initiation was nothing else but the rupture of a magnetic current infected by evil wills. Our name is Legion, for we are many, said the instinctive voice of the possessed sufferer. Possessions by the demon are bewitchments, and such cases are innumerable at the present day. A saintly monk who has devoted himself to the service of the insane, Brother Hilarion Tissot, has succeeded, after long experience and incessant practice, in curing a number of patients by unconsciously using the magnetism of Paracelsus. He attributes most of his cases either to disorder of the subject's will or to the perverse influence of external wills. He regards all crimes as acts of madness and would treat the wicked as disease, instead of exasperating and making them incurable under the pretense of punishing them. What space of time must still elapse ere poor Brother Hilarion Tissot will be hailed as a man of genius? And how many serious men, when they read this chapter, will say that Tissot and myself should treat one another according to our common ideas, but should refrain from publishing our theories if we do not wish to be reckoned as physicians deserving the madhouse. It revolves notwithstanding, said Galileo, stamping his foot upon the earth. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free, said the Savior of men. It might be added, ye shall love justice, and justice shall make you whole men. A vice is a poison even for the body. True virtue is a pledge of longevity. The method of ceremonial bewitchments varies with times and persons. All subtle and domineering people find its secrets and its practice within themselves, without even actually calculating about them or reasoning on their sequence. Herein they follow instinctive inspirations of the great agent, which, as we have said, accommodates itself marvelously to our vices and our virtues. It may be generally laid down, however, that we are subjected to the wills of others according to the analogies of our tendencies and above all of our faults. To pamper the weakness of an individuality is to possess ourselves of that individuality and convert it into an instrument in the order of the same errors or depravities. Now, when two natures whose defects are analogous become subordinated one to another, the result is a sort of substitution of the stronger for the weaker, an actual obsession of one mind by the other. Very often the weaker may struggle and seek to revolt, but it falls only deeper in servitude. So did Louis XIII conspire against Richelieu and subsequently, so to speak, sought his pardon by abandoning his accomplices. We all have a ruling defect, which is for our soul as the umbilical cord of its birth in sin, and it is by this that the enemy can always lay hold upon us. For some it is vanity, for others idleness, for the majority egotism. Let a wicked and crafty mind avail itself of this means, and we are lost. We may not go mad or turn idiots, but we become positively alienated in all the force of the expression. That is, we are subjected to a foreign suggestion. In such a state, one dreads instinctively everything that might bring us back to reason, and will not even listen to representations that are opposed to our obsession. Here is one of the most dangerous disorders which can affect the moral nature. The sole remedy for such a bewitchment is to make use of folly itself in order to cure folly, to provide the sufferer with imaginary satisfactions in the opposite order to that wherein he is now lost. Endeavor, for example, to cure an ambitious person by making him desire the glories of heaven. Mystic remedy, cure one who is dissolute by true love. Natural remedy, obtain honorable successes for a vain person. Exhibit unselfishness to the avaricious and procure for them legitimate profit by honorable participation in generous enterprises, etc. Acting in this way upon the moral nature, we may succeed in curing a number of physical maladies, for the moral affects the physical in virtue of the magical axiom, that which is above is like unto that which is below. This is why the Master said, when speaking of the paralyzed woman, Satan has bound her. A disease invariably originates in a deficiency or an excess, and never at the root of a physical evil we shall find a moral disorder. This is an unchanging law of nature. Astrology, Stella os inflexus. Of all the arts which have originated in ancient Magian wisdom, astrology is now the most misunderstood. No one believes any longer in the universal harmonies of nature and in the necessary interconnection of all effects with all causes. Moreover, true astrology, that which derives from the unique and universal dogma of the Kabbalah, became profane among the Greeks and Romans of the decline. The doctrine of the 7 spheres and the 3 mobiles, drawn primitively from the Sephirotic decade, the character of the planets governed by angels whose names have been changed into those of pagan divinities, the influence of the spheres on one another, the destiny attached to numbers, the scale of proportion between the celestial hierarchies corresponding to the human hierarchies. All this has been materialized and degraded into superstition by genethliacal soothsayers and directors of horoscopes during the decline in the Middle Ages. The restoration of astrology to its primitive purity would be, in a sense, the creation of an entirely new science. Our present concern is only to indicate its first principles, with their more immediate and approximate consequences. We have said that the astral light receives and preserves the impressions of all visible things. It follows herefrom that the daily position of the heaven is reflected in this light, which, being the chief agent of life, operates the conception, gestation, and birth of children by a sequence of apparatuses designed naturally to this end. Now, if this light be so prodigal of images as to impart the visible imprints of a maternal fantasy or appetite to the fruit of pregnancy, still more will it transmit to the plastic and indeterminate temperament of a newly born child the atmospheric impressions and diverse influences which, in the entire planetary system, are consequent at a given moment upon such or such particular aspect of the stars. Nothing is indifferent to nature. A stone more or a stone less upon a road may break or modify profoundly the destinies of the greatest men or even the largest empires. Still more must the position of this or that star in the sky have an influence on the child who is born, and who enters by the very fact of his birth into the universal harmony of the sidereal world. The stars are bound to one another by the attractions which hold them in equilibrium, and cause them to move with uniformity through space. From all spheres unto all spheres there stretch these indestructible networks of light, and there is no point upon any planet to which one of them is not attached. The true adept in astrology must give heed, therefore, to the precise time and place of the birth which is in question. Then, after an exact calculation of the astral influences, it remains for him to compute the chances of his state. That is to say, the advantages or hindrances which the child must one day meet with by reason of position, relatives, inherited tendencies, and hence natural proclivities, in the fulfillment of his destinies. Finally, he will have also to take into consideration human liberty and its initiative, should the child eventually come to be a true man and to isolate himself by strength of will from fatal influences and from the chain of destiny. It will be seen that we do not allow too much to astrology, but so much as we leave it is indubitable. It is the scientific and magical calculus of probabilities. Astrology is as ancient as astronomy, and indeed it is more ancient. All seers of lucid antiquity have accorded it their fullest confidence, and it is not for us to condemn and reject lightly anything which comes before us encompassed and supported by such imposing authorities. Long and patient observations, Conclusive comparisons, frequently repeated experiments, must have led the old sages to their decisions, and to refute them the same labor must be undertaken from an opposite standpoint. Paracelsus was perhaps the last of the great practical astrologers. He cured diseases by talismans formed under astral influences. He distinguished upon all bodies the mark of their dominant star. There, according to him, was the true universal medicine, the absolute science of nature, lost by man's own fault and recovered only by a small number of initiates. To recognize the sign of each star upon men, animals, and plants is the true natural science of Solomon, that science which is said to be lost, but the principles of which are preserved notwithstanding, as are all other secrets in the symbolism of the Kabbalah. It will be understood readily that in order to read the stars, one must know the stars themselves. Now, this knowledge is obtained by the Kabbalistic domification of the sky, and by mastering the celestial planisphere, as rediscovered and explained by Gaffarel. In this planisphere, the constellations form Hebrew letters, and the mythological figures may be replaced by the symbols of the tarot. To this same planisphere Gaffarel refers the origin of patriarchal writing, and the first lineaments of primitive characters may very well have been found in the chains of starry attraction, in which case the celestial book would have served as the model of Enoch's, and the Kabbalistic alphabet would have been a synopsis of the entire sky. This is not wanting in poetry, nor above all in probability, and the study of the tarot, which is evidently the primitive and hieroglyphic work of Enoch, as was divined by the erudite William Postel, is sufficient to convince us hereof. The signs imprinted in the astral light by the reflection and attraction of the stars are reproduced, therefore, as the sages have discovered, on all bodies which are formed by the cooperation of that light. Men bear the signs of their star on their forehead chiefly, and in their hands. Animals in their whole form and in their individual signs. Plants in their leaves and seed. Minerals in their veins and in the peculiarities of their fracture. The study of these characters was the entire life work of Paracelsus, and the figures on his talismans are the result of his researches. But he has given us no key to these, and hence the astro-Kabbalistic alphabet with its correspondences still remains to be constructed. As regards publicity, the science of non-conventional magical writing stopped with the planisphere of Gaffarel. The serious art of divination rests wholly in the knowledge of these signs. Chiromancy is the art of reading the writing of the stars in the lines of the hand, and physiognomy seeks the same or analogous characters upon the countenance of querents. As a fact, the lines formed on the human face by nervous contractions are determined fatally, and the radiation of the nervous tissue is absolutely analogous to those networks which are formed between the worlds by chains of starry attraction. The fatalities of life are therefore written necessarily in our wrinkles, and a first glance frequently revealed upon the forehead of a stranger either one or more of the mysterious letters of the Kabbalistic planisphere. Should the letter be jagged and scored deeply, there has been a struggle between will and fatality, and in his most powerful emotions and tendencies, the individual's entire past manifests to the magus. From this it becomes easy to conjecture the future, and if events deceive the sagacity of the diviner from time to time, he who has consulted him will remain nonetheless astounded and convinced by the superhuman knowledge of the adept. The human head is formed upon the model of the celestial spheres. It attracts and it radiates, and this it is which first forms and manifests in the conception of a child. Hence the head is subject in an absolute manner to astral influence, and evidences its several attractions by its diverse protuberances. The final word of phrenology is to be found, therefore, in scientific and purified astrology, the problems of which we bequeath to the patience and good faith of scholars. According to Ptolemy, the sun dries up and the moon moistens. According to the Kabbalists, the sun represents strict justice, while the moon is in sympathy with mercy. It is the sun which produces storms, and by a kind of gentle atmospheric pressure, the moon occasions the ebb and flow, or, as it were, the respiration of the sea. We read in the Zohar, one of the great sacred books of the Kabbalah, that the magical serpent, the son of the sun, was about to devour the world, when the sea, daughter of the moon, set her foot upon his head and subdued him. For this reason, among the ancients, Venus was the daughter of the sea, as Diana was identical with the moon. Hence also the name of Mary signifies star or salt of the sea. To consecrate this Kabbalistic doctrine in the belief of the vulgar is said in prophetic language, "The woman shall crush the serpent's head." Jerome Cardan, one of the boldest students, and beyond contradiction the most skillful astrologer of his time, Jerome Cardan, who was a martyr to his faith in astrology, if we accept the legend of his death, has left a calculation by means of which anyone can foresee the good or evil fortune attached to all years of his life. His theory was based upon his own experiences, and he assures us that his calculation never deceived him. To ascertain the fortune of a given year, he sums up the events of those which have preceded it by 4, 8, 12, 19, and 30. The number 4 is that of realization, 8 is the number of Venus or natural things, 12 belongs to the cycle of Jupiter and corresponds to successes, 19 has reference to the cycles of the moon and of Mars, the number 30 is that of Saturn or fatality. Thus, for example, I desire to ascertain what will befall me in this present year, 1855. I pass therefore in review those decisive events in the order of life and progress which occurred 4 years ago, the natural felicity or misfortune of 8 years back, the successes or failures belonging to 12 years since, the vicissitudes and miseries or diseases which overtook me 19 years from now, and my tragic or fatal experiences of 30 years back. Then, taking into account irrevocably accomplished facts in the advance of time, I calculate the chances analogous to those which I owe already to the influence of the same planets, and I conclude that in 1851 I had employment which was moderately but sufficiently remunerative, with some embarrassment of position. In 1847 I was separated violently from my family, with great attendant sufferings for mine and me. In 1843 I traveled as an apostle, addressing the people and suffering the persecution of ill-meaning persons. Briefly, I was at once honored and proscribed. Finally, in 1825, family life came to an end for me, and I entered definitely on that fatal path which led me to science and misfortune. I may suppose, therefore, that this year I shall experience toil, poverty, vexation, hard exile, change of place, publicity, and contradictions, with some eventuality which will be decisive for the rest of my life. Every indication in the present leads me to endorse this forecast. Hence I conclude that for myself and for this year, experience confirms fully the precision of Cardan's astrological calculus, which connects furthermore with the climacteric years of ancient astrologers. This term signifies arranged in scales or calculated on the degrees of a scale. Johann Trithemius, in his book on secondary causes, has computed the recurrence of fortunate or calamitous years for all empires of the world. In the 21st chapter of our ritual, we shall give an exact analysis of this work, together with a continuation of the labor of Trithemius to our own days and the application of his magical scale to contemporary events, so as to deduce the most striking probabilities relative to the immediate future of France, Europe, and the world. According to all the grand masters in astrology, comets are the stars of exceptional heroes, and they visit Earth only to signalize great changes. The planets preside over collective existences and modify the destinies of mankind in the aggregate. The fixed stars, more remote and more feeble in their action, attract individuals and determine their tendencies. Sometimes a group of stars may combine to influence the destinies of a single man, while often a great number of souls are drawn by the distant rays of the same sun. When we die, our interior light in departing follows the attraction of its star, and thus it is that we live in other universes, where the soul makes for itself a new garment, analogous to the development or diminution of its beauty. For our souls, when separated from our bodies, resemble revolving stars. They are globules of animated light, which always seek their center for the recovery of their equilibrium in their true movement. Before all things, however, they must liberate themselves from the folds of the serpent, that is, the unpurified astral light which envelops and imprisons them, unless the strength of their will can lift them beyond its reach. The immersion of the living star in the dead light is a frightful torment, comparable to that of Mezentius. Therein the soul freezes and burns at the same time and has no means of getting free except by re-entering the current of exterior forms and assuming a fleshly envelope, then energetically battling against instincts to strengthen that moral liberty which will permit it at the moment of death to break the chains of earth and wing its flight in triumph towards the star of consolation which has smiled in light upon it. Following this clue, we can understand the nature of the fire of hell, which is identical with the demon or old serpent. We can gather also wherein consists the salvation and reprobation of men, all called and all selected successfully, but in small number after having risked falling into the eternal fire through their own fault. Such is the great and sublime revelation of the Magi, a revelation which is the mother of all symbols, of all dogmas, of all religions. We can realize already how far Dupuy was mistaken in regarding astronomy as the source of every cultus. It is astronomy, on the contrary, which has sprung from astrology, and primitive astrology is one of the branches of the Holy Kabbalah, the science of sciences and the religion of religions. Hence, upon the 17th page of the Tarot, we find an admirable allegory, a naked woman typifying truth, nature, and wisdom at one and the same time, turns two ewers towards earth, and pours out fire and water upon it. Above her head glitters the septenary, starred about an 8-pointed star, that of Venus, symbol of peace and love. The plants of earth are flourishing around the woman, and on one of them the butterfly of Psyche has alighted. This emblem of the soul is replaced in some copies of the sacred book by a bird, which is a more Egyptian and probably a more ancient symbol. In the modern tarot, the plate is entitled the Glittering Star. It is analogous to a number of Hermetic symbols, and is also in correspondence with the blazing star of Masonic initiates, which expresses most of the mysteries of Rosicrucian secret doctrine. Charms and Filters. Justitia Mysterium Canes. We have now to approach the most criminal abuse to which magical sciences can be put, namely venomous magic, or rather sorcery. Let it be understood here that we write not to instruct but to warn. If human justice, instead of punishing the adepts, had proscribed only the necromancers and poisoning sorcerers, it is certain, as we have observed previously, that its severity could have been well placed, since the most severe penalties can never be excessive in the case of such criminals. At the same time, it must not be supposed that the right of life and death, which belongs secretly to the Magus, has been exercised always to satisfy some infamous vengeance, or some cupidity more infamous still. In the Middle Ages, as in the ancient world, magical associations have frequently struck down or destroyed slowly the revealers or profaners of mysteries, and when the magic sword has refrained from striking, when the spilling of blood was dangerous, then aqua tofana, poison nosegays, the shirt of Nasus, and other deadly instruments still stranger and still less known, were used to carry out sooner or later the terrible sentence of the free judges. We have said that there is in magic a great and indicable arcanum, which is never mentioned among adepts, which the profane above all must be prevented from divining. In former times, whosoever revealed or caused the key of this supreme secret to be discovered by others through imprudent revelations was condemned immediately to death, and was often driven to execute the sentence himself. The celebrated prophetic supper of Cazot, described by La Harpe, has not been understood hitherto. La Harpe very naturally yielded to the temptation of surprising his readers by amplifying the details of his narrative. Everyone present at this supper, La Harpe expected, was an initiate who had divulged or at least profaned the mysteries. Cazot, the most exalted of all in the scale of initiation, pronounced their sentence of death in the name of Illuminism, and this sentence was executed variously but rigorously, even as several years and several centuries previously had occurred in the case of similar judgments against the Abbé de Villars, Urban Grandier, and many others. The revolutionary philosophers perished, as did Cagliostro, deserted in the prisons of the Inquisition, as did the mystic band of Catherine Theos, as did the imprudent Schröpfer, driven to suicide in the midst of magical triumphs and the universal infatuation, as did the deserter Kotzebue, who was stabbed by Karl Sand, as did also so many others whose corpses have been discovered without anyone being able to ascertain the cause of their sudden and sanguinary death. The strange allocution addressed to Cazotte when he himself was condemned by the president of the Revolutionary Tribunal will be called readily to mind. The Gordian knot of the terrible drama of '93 is still concealed in the darkest sanctuary of the secret societies. To adepts of good faith who sought to emancipate the common people were opposed those of another sect, attached to more ancient traditions who fought against them by means analogous to those of their adversaries. The practice of the Great Arcanum was made impossible by unmasking its theory. The crowd understood nothing, but it misdoubted everything, and fell lower still in its discouragement than some had schemed to raise it. The Great Arcanum became more secret than ever. The adepts, checkmated by each other, could exercise their power neither to govern the uninitiated nor to deliver themselves. They condemned one another to the death of traitors. They abandoned one another to exile, to suicide, to the knife and the scaffold. I shall be asked possibly whether equally terrible dangers threaten at this day the intruders into the occult sanctuary and the betrayers of its secret. Why should I answer anything to the incredulity of the inquisitive? If I risk a violent death for their instruction, certainly they will not save me. If they are afraid on their own account, let them abstain from imprudent research. This is all I can say to them. Let us return to venomous magic. In his romance of Monte Cristo, Alexandre Dumas has revealed some practices of this ominous science. There is no need to traverse the same ground by repeating its melancholy theories of crime, describing how plants are poisoned, how animals nourished on these plants have their flesh infected and becoming in turn the food of men, cause death without leaving any trace of poison, how the walls of houses are inoculated, how the air is permeated by fumes which require the glass mask of St. Croix for the operator. Let us leave the ancient Canidia her abominable mysteries, and refrain from investigating the extent to which the infernal rites of Sagana have carried the art of Locusta. It is enough to state that this most infamous class of malefactors distilled together the virus of contagious diseases, the venom of reptiles, and the sap of poisonous plants, that they extracted from the fungus its deadly and narcotic properties, its asphyxiating principles from Datura artemonium, from the peach and bitter almond that poison one drop of which, placed on the tongue or in the ear, destroys like a flash of lightning the strongest and best constituted living being. The white juice of sea lettuce was boiled with milk in which vipers and asps had been drowned. The sap of the manchineal or deadly fruit of Java was either brought back with them from their long journeys or imported at great expense. So also was the juice of the casada, and so were similar poisons. They pulverized flint, mixed with impure ashes the dried slime of reptiles, composed hideous filters with the virus of mares on heat and similar secretions of bitches. They mingled human blood with infamous drugs, composing an oil the mere odor of which was fatal, therein recalling the tart bourbonnaise of Panurge. They even concealed recipes for poisoning in the technical language of alchemy, and the secret of the powder of projection, in more than one old book which claims to be hermetic, is in reality that of the powder of succession. The Grand Grimoire gives one in particular which is very thinly disguised under the title of Method of Making Gold. It is an atrocious decoction of verdigris, arsenic, and sawdust, which, if properly prepared, should consume immediately a branch that is plunged into it, and eat swiftly through an iron nail. John Baptist Porta cites in his Natural Magic a specimen of Borgia poison, but as may be imagined, he is deceiving the vulgar and does not divulge the truth, which would be too dangerous in such a connection. We may therefore quote his recipe to satisfy the curiosity of our readers. The toad itself is not venomous, but it is a sponge for poisons, and is the mushroom of the animal kingdom. Take then a plump toad, says Porta, and place it with vipers and asps in a globular bottle. Let poisonous fungi, foxgloves, and hemlock be their sole nourishment during a period of several days. Then enrage them by beating, burning, and tormenting in every conceivable manner, till they die of rage and hunger. Sprinkle their bodies with powdered spurge and ground glass. Place them in a well-sealed retort and extract all their moisture by fire. Let the glass cool. Separate the ash of the dead bodies from the incombustible dust which will remain at the bottom of the retort. You will then have two poisons, one liquid, the other a powder. The first will be fully as efficacious as the terrible aqua tofana. The second, in a few days' time, will cause any person who may have a pinch of it mixed with his drink to grow wilted and old, and subsequently to die amidst horrible sufferings, or in a state of complete collapse. It must be admitted that this recipe has a magical physiognomy of the blackest and most revolting kind, and sickens one by its recollections of the abominable confections of Canidia and Medea. The sorcerers of the Middle Ages pretended to receive such powders at the Sabbath, and sold them at a high price to the malicious and ignorant. The tradition of similar mysteries spread terror in country places and came to act as a spell. The imagination once impressed, the nervous system once assailed, the victim rapidly wasted away, the very dread of his relatives and friends sealing his doom. The sorcerer and sorceress were almost invariably a species of human toad, swollen with long-enduring rancors. They were poor, repulsed by all, and consequently full of hatred. The fear which they inspired was their consolation in their revenge. Poisoned themselves by a society of which they had experienced nothing but the rebuffs and the vices, they poisoned in their turn all those who were weak enough to fear them, and avenged upon beauty and youth their accursed old age and their atrocious ugliness. The perpetration of these evil works and the fulfillment of these loathsome mysteries constituted and confirmed what was then called a pact with the devil. It is certain that the operator must have been given over body and soul to evil and justly deserved the universal and irrevocable reprobation expressed by the allegory of hell. That human souls could descend to such an abyss of crime and madness must assuredly astonish and afflict us. But is not such gulf needed as a basis for the exaltation of the most sublime virtues? Does not the depth of Infernus demonstrate by antithesis the infinite height and grandeur of heaven? In the north, where the instincts are more repressed and deep-rooted, in Italy, where the passions are more unreserved and fiery, charms and the evil eye are still dreaded. The jettatura is not to be braved with impunity in Naples, and persons who are endowed unfortunately with this power are even distinguished by certain exterior signs. In order to guard against it, experts affirm that horns must be carried on the person, and the common people, who take everything literally, hasten to adorn themselves with small horns, not dreaming of the sense of the allegory. These attributes of Jupiter Ammon, Bacchus, and Moses are a symbol of moral power or enthusiasm, so that the magicians mean to say that, in order to withstand the jettatura, the fatal current of instincts must be governed by great intrepidity, great enthusiasm, or a great thought. In like manner, almost all popular superstitions are vulgar interpretations of some grand maxim or marvelous secret of occult wisdom. Did not Pythagoras, in his admirable symbols, bequeath a perfect philosophy to sages, but a new series of vain observances and ridiculous practices to the vulgar? Thus, when he said, "Do not pick up what falls from the table, do not cut down trees on the great highway, kill not the serpent when it slips into your garden," was he not inculcating the precepts of charity, either social or personal, under transparent allegories? When he said, "Do not look at yourself by torchlight in a mirror," was he not teaching ingeniously that true self-knowledge which is incompatible with factitious lights and the prejudgments of systems? It is the same with the other precepts of Pythagoras, who is well known to have been followed literally by a swarm of unintelligent disciples, and indeed amongst our provincial superstitious observances there are many which belong indubitably to the primitive misconception of Pythagorean symbols. Superstition is derived from a Latin word which signifies survival. It is the sign surviving the thought. It is the dead body of a religious rite. Superstition is to initiation what the notion of the devil is to that of God. This is the sense in which the worship of images is forbidden, and in this sense also a doctrine most holy in its original conception may become superstitious and impious when it has lost its spirit and its inspiration. Then does religion, ever one like the supreme reason, exchange its vestures and abandon old rites to the cupidity and roguery of fallen priests, transformed by their wickedness and ignorance into jugglers and charlatans. We may include among superstitions those magical emblems and characters of which the meaning is understood no longer, which are engraved by chance on amulets and talismans. The magical images of the ancients were panticles, i.e. Kabbalistic syntheses. Thus, the wheel of Pythagoras is a panticle analogous to the wheels of Ezekiel. The two emblems contain the same secrets and belong to the same philosophy. They constitute the key of all panticles, and we have made mention previously of both. The four living creatures, or rather the four-headed sphinx, of the same prophet are identical with the admirable Indian symbol of Adonari, given on the next page as having reference to the Great Arcanum. In his Apocalypse, St. John followed and elaborated Ezekiel. Indeed, the monstrous figures of his wonderful book are so many magical panticles, the key of which is easily discoverable by Kabbalists. On the other hand, Christians, rejecting science in their anxiety to extend faith, sought later on to conceal the origin of their dogmas and condemned all Kabbalistic and magical books to the flames. To destroy originals gives a kind of originality to copies, as was doubtless in the mind of St. Paul when, prompted beyond question by the most laudable intention, he accomplished his scientific auto de fe at Ephesus. In the same way, 6 centuries later, the true believer Omar sacrificed the Library of Alexandria to the originality of the Quran, and who knows whether in the time to come a future apostle will not set fire to our literary museums and confiscate the printing press in the interest of some fresh religious infatuation, some newly accredited legend. The study of talismans and panticles is one of the most curious branches of magic and connects with historical numismatics. There are Indian, Egyptian, and Greek talismans, Kabbalistic medals coming from ancient and modern Jews, Gnostic abraxas, occult tokens in use among members of secret societies, and sometimes called counters of the Sabbath. So also there are Templar medals and jewels of Freemasonry. In his treatise on the wonders of nature, Cublanius describes the talismans of Solomon and those of Rabbi Kale. Designs of many others that are most ancient will be found in the magical calendars of Tycho Brahe and Duquesnoy, and should have a place in M. Ragon's archives on initiation, a vast and scholarly undertaking to which we refer our readers. The Stone of the Philosophers, Elagabalus, Vocatio Sol Aurum. The ancients adored the sun under the figure of a black stone, which they named Elagabalus or Heliogabalus. What did this stone signify, and how came it to be the image of the most brilliant of luminaries? The disciples of Hermes, before promising their adepts the elixir of long life or the powder of projection, counseled them to seek for the philosophical stone. What is this stone, and why is it so called? The great initiator of the Christians invites his believers to build on the stone or rock if they do not wish their structures to be demolished. He terms himself the cornerstone and says to the most faithful of his apostles, "Thou art Peter, Petrus, and upon this rock, Petrum, I shall build my church." This stone, say the masters in alchemy, is the true salt of the philosophers, which is the third ingredient in the composition of azoth. Now, we know already that azoth is the name of the great hermetic and true philosophical agent. Furthermore, their salt is represented under the figure of a cubic stone, as may be seen in the 12 Keys of Basil Valentine, or in the allegories of Trevisan. Once more, what is this stone actually? It is the foundation of absolute philosophy. It is supreme and immovable reason. Before even dreaming of the metallic work, we must be fixed forever upon the absolute principle of wisdom. We must possess that reason which is the touchstone of truth. Never will a man of prejudices become the king of nature and the master of transmutations. The philosophical stone is hence before all things necessary, but how is it to be found? Hermes informs us in his Emerald Table. We must separate the subtle from the fixed with great care and assiduous attention. Thus we must separate our certitudes from our beliefs, and distinguish sharply the respective domains of science and faith, realizing that we do not know things which we believe, and that we cease immediately to believe anything which we come actually to know. It follows that the essence of the things of faith is the is quite the reverse with the things of science. It must be inferred from this that science rests on reason and experience, whilst the basis of faith is sentiment and reason. In other words, the philosophical stone is the true certitude which human prudence assures to conscientious researches and modest doubt, whilst religious enthusiasm ascribes it exclusively to faith. Now it belongs neither to reason without aspirations, nor to aspirations without reason. True certitude is the reciprocal acquiescence of the reason which knows in the sentiment which believes, and of the sentiment which believes in the reason which knows. The permanent alliance of reason and faith will result not from their absolute distinction and separation, but from their mutual control and their fraternal concurrence. Such is the significance of the two pillars of Solomon's porch, one named Jachin and the other Boaz, one white and the other black. They are distinct and separate. They are even contrary in appearance. But if blind force sought to join them by bringing them close to one another, the roof of the temple would collapse. Separately, their power is one. Joined, they are two powers which destroy one another. For precisely the same reason, the spiritual power is weakened whensoever it attempts to usurp the temporal, while the temporal power becomes the victim of its encroachments on the spiritual. Gregory VII ruined the papacy. The schismatic kings have lost and will lose the monarchy. Human equilibrium requires 2 feet. The worlds gravitate by means of 2 forces. Generation needs 2 sexes. Such is the meaning of the Arcanum of Solomon, represented by the 2 pillars of the temple, Jachin and Boaz. The sun and moon of the alchemists correspond to the same symbol and concur in the perfection and stability of the philosophical stone. The sun is the hieroglyphic sign of truth, because it is the visible source of light, and the rough stone is the symbol of stability. This is why the ancient Magi regarded the stone Elagabalus as the actual type of the sun, and for this reason the medieval alchemists pointed to the philosophical stone as the first means of making philosophical gold, that is to say, of transforming the vital forces represented by the 6 metals into soul, otherwise into truth and light, the first and indispensable operation of the great work, leading to the secondary adaptations and discovering, by the analogies of nature, the natural and grosser gold to the possessors of the spiritual and living gold, of the true salt, the true mercury, and the true sulfur of the philosophers. To find the philosophical stone is then to have discovered the absolute, as the masters say otherwise. Now the absolute is that which admits of no errors. It is the fixation of the volatile. It is the rule of the imagination. It is the very necessity of being. It is the immutable law of reason and truth. The absolute is that which is. Now that which is, in some sense, precedes he who is. God himself cannot be in the absence of a ground of being and can exist only in virtue of a supreme and inevitable reason. It is this reason which is the absolute. It is this in which we must believe if we desire a rational and solid foundation for our faith. It may be said in these days that God is merely a hypothesis, but the absolute reason is not. It is essential to being. St. Thomas once said, "A thing is not just because God wills it, but God wills it because it is just." Had St. Thomas deduced all the consequences of this beautiful thought, he would have found the philosophical stone, and besides being the angel of the schools, he would have been their reformer. To believe in the reason of God and in the God of reason is to render atheism impossible. When Voltaire said if God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him, he felt rather than understood the reason which is in God. Does God really exist? There is no knowing, but we desire it to be so, and hence we believe it. Faith thus formulated is reasonable faith, for it admits the doubt of science, and as a fact we believe only in things which seem to us probable, though we do not know them. To think otherwise is delirium. To speak otherwise is to talk like Illuminati or fanatics. Now it is not to such persons that the philosophical stone is promised. The ignoramuses who have turned primitive Christianity from its path by substituting faith for science, dream for experience, the fantastic for the real. Inquisitors who, during so many ages, have waged a war of extermination against magic, have succeeded in enveloping with darkness the ancient discoveries of the human mind, so that we are now groping for a key to the phenomena of nature. Now all natural phenomena depend upon a single and immutable law, represented represented by the philosophical stone and especially by its cubic form. This law, expressed by the tetrad in the Kabbalah, equipped the Hebrews with all the mysteries of their divine tetragram. It may be said, therefore, that the philosophical stone is square in every sense, like the heavenly Jerusalem of St. John, that one of its sides is inscribed with the name, and the other with that of God, that one of its facets bears the name of Adam, a second that of Heva, and the two others those of Azot and Inri. At the beginning of the French translation of a book by the Sieur de Nuismont on the philosophical salt, the spirit of the earth is represented standing on a cube over which tongues of flame are passing. The phallus is replaced by a caduceus, the sun and moon figure on the right and left breast. The figure is bearded, crowned, and holds a scepter in his hand. This is the Azoth of the sages on its pedestal of salt and sulfur. The symbolic head of the goat of Mendes is occasionally given to this figure, and it is then the Baphomet of the Templars and the word of the Gnostics, bizarre images which became scarecrows for the vulgar after affording food for reflection to sages, innocent hieroglyphs of thought and faith which have been a pretext for the rage of persecutions. How pitiable are men in their ignorance, but how they would despise themselves if only they came to know. The Universal Medicine, Caput Resurrectio Circulis. The majority of our physical complaints come from our moral diseases, according to the one and universal dogma, and by reason of the law of analogies. A great passion to which we abandon ourselves corresponds always to a great malady in store. Mortal sins are so named because they cause death physically and positively. Alexander the Great died of pride. He was naturally temperate, and it was through pride that he yielded to the excess which occasioned his death. Francis I died of an adultery. Louis XV died of his parc aux cerfs. When Marat was assassinated, he was perishing of rage and envy. He was a monomaniac of pride, who believed himself to be the only just man, and would have slain everything that was not Marat. Several of our contemporaries perished of fallen ambition after the Revolution of February. So soon as any will is confirmed irrevocably in the tendency towards the absurd, the man is dead, and the rock on which he will break is not remote. It is therefore true to say that wisdom preserves and prolongs life. The great master told us, "My flesh is meat indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. He that eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood hath everlasting life." And when the crowd murmured, he added, "Here the flesh profiteth nothing. The words that I speak unto you are spirit and life." So also, when he was about to die, he attached the remembrance of his life to the sign of bread, and that of his spirit to the symbol of wine, thus instituting the communion of faith, hope, and charity. Now it is in the same sense that the Hermetic Masters have said, "Make gold potable, and you will have the universal medicine." That is to say, appropriate truth to your needs. Let it become the source at which you daily drink, and you will in yourself have the immortality of the sages. Temperance, tranquility of soul, simplicity of character, calmness and rationality of will. These things not only make us happy, but strong and well. By growth in reason and goodness, man becomes immortal. We are the authors of our own destiny, and God does not save us apart from our own concurrence. There is no death for the sage. Death is a phantom made horrible by the weakness and ignorance of the vulgar. Change is the sign of motion, and motion reveals life. If the corpse itself were dead, its decomposition would be impossible. All its constituent molecules are living and working out their liberation. Yet you dream that the spirit is set free first so that it may cease to live. You believe that thought and love can die when the grossest matter is imperishable. If change must be called death, we die and are reborn daily, because daily our forms change. Fear, therefore, to soil or rend your garments, but do not fear to lay them by when the hour of sleep approaches. The embalming and mummification of bodies is a superstition which is against nature. It is an attempt to create death. It is the forcible petrification of a substance which is needed by life. But, on the other hand, we must not be quick to destroy or make away with bodies. There is no suddenness in the operations of nature, and we must not risk any violent rupture of the bonds of a departing soul. Death is never instantaneous. It is, like sleep, gradual. So long as the blood has not become absolutely cold, so long as the nerves can quiver, a man is not wholly dead, and if none of the vital organs are destroyed, the soul can be recalled, either by accident or by a strong will. A philosopher declared that he would discredit universal testimony rather than believe in the resurrection of a dead person, but his utterance was rash, for it was on the faith of universal testimony that he believed in the impossibility of resurrection. Supposing such an occurrence were proved, what would follow? Must we deny evidence or renounce reason? It would be absurd to say so. We should infer rather that we were wrong in supposing resurrection to be impossible. Ab actu ad posse vale consecutio. Let us now make bold to affirm that resurrection is possible and occurs oftener than might be thought. Many persons whose deaths have been attested legally and scientifically have been found afterwards in their coffins dead indeed, but having evidently come to life and having bitten through their clenched hands so as to open the arteries and escape from their horrible agonies. The doctor would tell us that such persons were in a lethargy and not dead. But what is lethargy? It is the name which we give to an uncompleted death, a death which is falsified by return to life. It is easy by words to escape from a difficulty when it is impossible to explain facts. The soul is joined to the body by means of sensibility, and when sensibility ceases, it is a sure sign that the soul is departing. The magnetic sleep is a lethargy or factitious death which is curable at will. The etherization or torpor produced by chloroform is a real lethargy which ends sometimes in absolute death, when the soul, ravished by its temporary liberation, makes an effort of will to become free altogether, which is possible for those who have conquered hell, that is to say, whose moral strength is superior to that of astral attraction. Hence resurrection is possible only for elementary souls, and it is these above all who run the risk of involuntary revival in the tomb. Great men and true sages are never buried alive. The theory and practice of resurrection will be given in our ritual. To those, meanwhile, who may ask whether I have raised the dead, I would say that if I replied in the affirmative, they would not believe me. It remains now to examine whether the abolition of pain is possible, and whether it is wholesome to employ chloroform or magnetism for surgical operations. We think, and science will acknowledge it later on, that by diminishing sensibility we diminish life, and what we subtract from pain under such circumstances turns to the profit of death. Suffering bears witness to the struggle for life, and hence we observe that the dressing of a wound is excessively painful for the persons who have been operated on under anesthetics. If chloroform were resorted to at each dressing, one of two things would happen. Either the patient would die, or the pain would return and continue between the dressings. Nature is not violated with impunity. Divination. Dentes furca amens. The author of this book has dared many things in his life, and never has fear retained his thought a prisoner. It is not at the same time without legitimate dread that he approaches the end of the magical doctrine. It is a question now of revealing, or rather reveiling, the great secret, the terrible secret, the secret of life and death, expressed in the Bible by those formidable and symbolical words of the serpent, who was himself symbolical. 1. Nequaquam moriamini. 2. Sed eritus. 3. Sicut di. 4. Scientes bonum et malum. One of the privileges which belong to the initiate of the great arcanum, and that which sums them all, is divination. According to the vulgar comprehension of the term, to divine signifies to conjecture what is unknown, but its true sense is ineffable in its sublimity. To divine, divinare, is to exercise divinity. The word divinus in Latin signifies something far different from divus, which is equivalent to man-god. Divine in French contains the 4 letters of the word Dieu, God, plus the letter N, which corresponds in its form to the Hebrew Aleph, and Kabbalistically and hieroglyphically expresses the great arcanum, the tarot symbol of which is the juggler. Whosoever understands perfectly the absolute numeral value of Aleph multiplied by n, with the grammatical force of the n final in words which signify science, art, or power, who subsequently adds the 5 letters of the word Davin in such a way as to make 5 go into 4, 4 into 3, 3 into 2, and 2 into 1, such a person, by translating the resultant number into primitive Hebrew characters, will write the occult name of the great arcana, and will possess a word of which the sacred tetragram itself is only the equivalent and the image. To be a diviner, according to the force of the term, is hence to be divine, and something more mysterious still. Now, the 2 signs of human divinity, or of divine humanity, are prophecies and miracles. To be a prophet is to see beforehand the effects which exist in causes, to read in the astral light. To work miracles is to act upon the universal agent and subject it to our will. The author of this book will be asked whether he is a prophet and thaumaturge. Let inquirers recur to all that he wrote before certain events took place in the world, and as to anything else that he may have said or done, would anyone believe his mere word if he made a sensational statement? Furthermore, one of the essential conditions of divination is not to be coerced, not to suffer temptation. In other words, not to be put to the test. Never have the masters of science yielded to the curiosity of anyone. The Sibyls burned their books when Tarquin refused to appraise them at their proper value. The great master was silent when he was asked for a sign of his divine mission. Agrippa perished of want rather than obey those who demanded a horoscope. To furnish proofs of science to those who suspect the very existence of science is to initiate the unworthy, to profane the gold of the sanctuary, to deserve the excommunication of sages and the fate of betrayers. The essence of divination, that is to say, the great magical arcanum, is represented by all the symbols of science and is connected intimately with the one and primeval doctrine of Hermes. In philosophy, it gives absolute certitude. In religion, the universal secret of faith. In physics, the composition, decomposition, recomposition, realization, and adaptation of philosophical mercury, called azoth by the alchemists. In dynamics, it multiplies our forces by those of perpetual motion. It is at once mystical, metaphysical, and material, with correspondent effects in the 3 worlds. It procures charity and God, truth and science, and gold and riches, for metallic transmutation is at once an allegory and reality, as all the adepts of true science are perfectly well aware. Yes, gold can be made really and materially by means of the stone of the sages, which is an amalgam of salt, sulfur, and mercury, thrice combined in azoth by a triple sublimation and a triple fixation. Yes, the operation is often easy and may be accomplished in a day, an instant. At other times it requires months and years. But to succeed in the great work, one must be divinus, a diviner in the Kabbalistic sense of the term, and it is indispensable to have renounced, in respect of personal interest, the advantage of wealth so as to become its dispenser. Raymond Lully enriched sovereigns, planted Europe with institutions, and remained poor. Nicholas Flamel, who in spite of his legend is really dead, only attained the great work when asceticism had detached him completely from riches. He was initiated by a suddenly imparted understanding of the book Eish Mezaref, written in Hebrew by the Kabbalist Abraham, possibly the compiler of the Sefer Yetzirah. Now this understanding was for Flamel an intuition deserved, or rather rendered possible by the personal preparations of the adept. I believe that I have spoken sufficiently. Divination is therefore an intuition, and the key of this intuition is the universal and magical doctrine of analogies. By means of these analogies, the magus interprets visions, as did the patriarch Joseph in Egypt, according to biblical history. The analogies and the reflections of the astral light are as exact as the shades of color in the solar spectrum, and can be calculated and explained with great accuracy. It is, however, indispensable to know the dreamer's degree of intellectual life, which indeed he will himself reveal completely by his own dreams and in a manner that will astonish himself. Somnambulism, presentiments, and second sight are simply an accidental or induced disposition to dream in a voluntary or awakened sleep. that is, to perceive the analogous reflections of the astral light, as we shall explain to demonstration in our ritual when providing the long-sought method of regularly producing and directing magnetic phenomena. As to divinatory instruments, they are simply a means of communication between diviner and consultant, serving merely to fix the two wills upon the same sign. Vague, complex, shifting figures help to focus reflections of the astral fluid, and it is thus that lucidity is procured by coffee grouts, mists, the white of egg, etc., which evoke fatidic forms existing only in the translucid, that is, in the imagination of the operators. Vision in water is operated by the dazzlement and fatigue of the optic nerve, which then resigns its functions to the translucid and produces a brain illusion in which reflections of the astral light are taken for real images. Hence, nervous persons of weak sight and lively imagination are best fitted for this species of divination, which indeed is most successful when exercised by children. Let us not misinterpret, however, the function which we attribute to imagination in divinatory arts. It is by imagination, assuredly, that we see, and this is the natural aspect of the miracle, but we see true things, and in this consists the marvelous aspect of the natural work. We appeal to the experience of all veritable adepts. The author of this book has tested every kind of divination, and has obtained results invariably in proportion to the exactitude of his scientific operations, and the good faith of his consultants. The tarot, that miraculous work which inspired all the sacred books of antiquity, is the most perfect instrument of divination, by reason of the analogical precision of its figures and numbers. It can be employed with complete confidence. Its oracles are always rigorously true, at least in a certain sense, and even when it predicts nothing, it reveals secret things and gives the most wise counsel to its querents. Eliot, who in the last century from a hairdresser became a Kabbalist, and Kabbalistically called himself Etela, reading his name backwards after the manner of Hebrew, Eliot, I say, after 30 years of meditation over the tarot, was on the threshold of discovering everything that is concealed in this extraordinary work, but he ended only by misplacing the keys through want of their proper understanding, and inverted the order and character of the figures, though without entirely destroying their analogies, so great are the sympathy and correspondence which exist between them. The writings of Etela, now very rare, are obscure, wearisome, and barbarous in style. They have not all been printed, and some manuscripts of this father of modern cartomancers are in the hands of a Paris bookseller, who has been good enough to let us examine them. Their most remarkable points are the obstinate perseverance and incontestable good faith of the author, who all his life perceived the grandeur of the occult sciences, but was destined to die at the gate of the sanctuary without ever penetrating behind the veil. He had little esteem for Agrippa, made much of Jean Belot, and knew nothing of the philosophy of Paracelsus, but he possessed a highly trained intuition and great persistence of will, though his fancy exceeded his judgment. His endowments were insufficient for a magus, and more than were needed for a skillful and accredited diviner of the vulgar order. Hence Etela had a fashionable success, which a more accomplished magician would perhaps have been wrong to renounce, but assuredly would not have claimed. When delivering at the end of our ritual a last message upon the tarot, we shall show the complete method of reading, and hence of consulting it, not only on the probable chances of destiny, but also and above all upon problems of philosophy and religion, concerning which it provides a solution as invariably certain as it is admirable in its precision, if explained in the hierarchic order of the analogy of the three worlds, with the three colors and the four shades which compose the sacred septenary. All this belongs to the positive practice of magic, and can be only indicated summarily and established theoretically in the present first part, which is dedicated to the doctrine of Transcendental Magic and the philosophical and religious key of the exalted sciences, known, or unknown rather, under the name of occult. Summary and general key of the four secret sciences. Signa, Thought, Pan. Let us now summarize the entire science by its principles. Analogy is the final word of science and the first word of faith. Harmony consists in equilibrium, and equilibrium subsists by the analogy of contraries. Absolute unity is the supreme and final reason of things. Now this reason can be neither one person nor three persons. It is a reason, and reason at the highest. To create equilibrium, we must separate and unite. Separate by the poles, unite by the center. To reason upon faith is to destroy faith. To create mysticism in philosophy is to assail reason. Reason and faith, by their nature, mutually exclude one another, but they unite by analogy. Analogy is the sole possible mediator between finite and infinite. Dogma is the ever-ascending hypothesis of a presumable equation. For the ignorant, it is the hypothesis which is absolute affirmation, and the absolute affirmation which is hypothesis. Hypotheses are necessary in science, and he who seeks to verify them enlarges science without decreasing faith, for on the farther side of faith is the infinite. We believe in that which we do not know, but which reason leads us to admit. To define and circumscribe the object of faith is therefore to formulate the unknown. Professions of faith are formulations of the ignorance and aspirations of man. The man who denies God is not less fanatical than he who defines him with pretended infallibility. God is commonly defined by the enumeration of all that he is not. Man makes God by an analogy from the lesser to the greater, whence it results that the conception of God by man is ever that of an infinite man who makes man a finite God. Man can realize that which he believes in the measure of that which he knows, by reason of that which he knows not, and he can accomplish all that he wills in the measure of that which he believes, and by reason of that which he knows. The analogy of contraries is the relation of light and shade, of height and hollow, of plenum and void. Allegory, the mother of all dogmas, is the substitution of impressions for dyes, of shadows for realities. It is the fable of truth and the truth of fable. One does not invent a dogma. One veils a truth, and a shade for weak eyes is produced. The initiator is not an impostor, he is a revealer. That is, following the meaning of the Latin word revelare, a man who veils afresh. He is the creator of a new shadow. Analogy is the key of all secrets of nature and the sole fundamental reason of all revelations. That is why religions seem to be written in the heavens and in all nature, which is just as it should be, for the work of God is the book of God, the expression of whose thoughts should be seen in that which he writes, and so also of his being, since we conceive him only as supreme thought. Dupuy and Volney saw only a plagiarism in this splendid correspondence, which should have led them to acknowledge the Catholicity, that is, the universality of the primeval, one, magical, Kabbalistic, and immutable doctrine of revelation by analogy. Analogy yields all forces of nature to the magus. Analogy is the quintessence of the philosophical stone, the secret of perpetual motion, the quadrature of the circle, the temple resting on the two pillars Jachin and Boaz, the key of the great arcanum, the root of the tree of life, the science of good and evil. To find the exact scale of correspondences in things appreciable by science is to fix the bases of faith, and thus become possessed of the rod of miracles. Now there exists a principle and a rigorous formula, which is the great arcanum. Let the wise man seek it not, since he has already found it. Let the profane seek forever, they will never find. Metallic transmutation takes place spiritually and materially by the positive key of analogies. Occult medicine is simply the exercise of the will applied to the very source of life, to that astral light the existence of which is a fact, which has a movement conformed to calculations having the great magical arcanum for their ascending in scale. This universal arcanum, the final and eternal secret of transcendent initiation, is represented in the tarot by a naked girl who touches the earth only by 1 foot, has a magnetic rod in each hand, and seems to be running in a crown held up by an angel, an eagle, a bull, and a lion. Fundamentally, the figure is analogous to the cherub of Jekesquiel, of which a representation is given, and to the Indian symbol of Adonari.
Always protect the ones that you love. Fight for them at all costs. But also strive for the higher realms, where true love can never be lost.
which again is analogous to the Adonai of Jekeskiel, who is vulgarly called Ezekiel. The comprehension of this figure is the key of all occult sciences. Readers of my book must already understand it philosophically if they are at all familiar with the symbolism of the Kabbalah. It remains for us now to realize what is the second and more important operation of the great work. It is something undoubtedly to find the philosophical stone, but how is it to be ground into the powder of projection? What are the uses of the magical wand? What is the real power of the divine names in the Kabbalah? The initiates know, and those who are deserving of initiation will know in turn if they discover the great arcanum by means of the very numerous and precise indications which we have given them. Why are these simple and pure truths forever and of necessity concealed? Because the elect of intelligence are always few on earth, and are encompassed by the foolish and wicked, like Daniel in the den of lions. Moreover, analogy instructs us in the laws of the hierarchy, and absolute science, being an omnipotence, must be the exclusive possession of the most worthy. The confusion of the hierarchy is the actual destruction of societies, for then the blind became leaders of the blind, according to the word of the Master. Give back initiation to priests and kings, and order will come forth anew. So, in my appeal to the most worthy, and in exposing myself to all the dangers and anathemas which threaten revealers, I believe myself to have done a great and useful thing, directing the breath of God living in humanity upon the social chaos, and creating priests and kings for the world to come. A thing is not just because God wills it, but God wills it because it is just, said the angel of the schools. It is as if he said, the absolute is reason. Reason is self-existent. It is because it is, and not because we suppose it. It is, or nothing is. And how should one desire anything to exist apart from reason? Madness itself does not occur without it. Reason is necessity, is law, is the rule of all liberty and the direction of all initiative. If God exists, it is by reason. The conception of an absolute God outside or independent of reason is the idol of black magic and the phantom of the fiend. The demon is death, masquerading in the tattered garments of life. The specter of Hiran-Kesep throned upon the rubbish of ruined civilizations, and concealing a loathsome nakedness by the cast-off clothes of the incarnations of Vishnu. Here ends the doctrine of Transcendental Magic. The Ritual of Transcendental Magic. Introduction. Knowest thou that old queen of the world who is on march always and wearies never? Every uncurbed passion, every selfish pleasure, every licentious energy of humanity, and all its tyrannous weakness go before the sordid mistress of our tearful valley, and, scythe in hand, these indefatigable laborers reap their eternal harvest. That queen is old as time, but her skeleton is concealed in the wreckage of woman's beauty, which she abstracts from their youth and love. Her skull is adorned with lifeless tresses that are not her own. Spoliator of crowned heads, she is embellished with a plunder of queens, from the star-begemmed hair of Berenice to that white, but not with age, which the executioner sheared from the brow of Marie Antoinette. Her livid and frozen body is clothed in faded garments and tattered winding sheets. Her bony hands, covered with rings, hold diadems and chains, scepters and crossbones, jewels and ashes. When she goes by, doors open of themselves. She passes through walls. She penetrates to the cabinets of kings. She surprises the extortioners of the poor in their most secret orgies. She sits down at their board, pours out their wine, grins at their songs with her gumless teeth, takes the place of the lecherous courtesan hidden behind their curtains. She delights to hover about sleeping voluptuaries. She seeks their caresses as if she hoped to grow warm in their embrace, but she freezes all those whom she touches and herself never kindles. At times notwithstanding, one would think her seized with frenzy. She stalks slowly no longer. She runs if her feet are too slow. She spurs a pale horse and charges all breathless through multitudes. Murder rides with her on a russet charger, shaking his mane of smoke. Fire flies before her with wings of scarlet and black. Famine and plague follow on diseased and emaciated steeds, gleaning the few sheaves which remain to complete her harvest. After this funereal procession come two little children, radiating with smiles and life, the intelligence and love of the coming century, the dual genius of a newborn humanity. The shadows of death fold up before them, as does night before the morning star. With nimble feet they skim the earth and sow with full hands the hope of another year. But death will come no more, impious and terrible, to mow like dry grass the ripe blades of the new age. It will give place to the angel of progress, who will gently liberate souls from mortal chains so that they may ascend to God. When men know how to live, they will die no longer. They will transform like the chrysalis, which becomes a splendid butterfly. The terrors of death are daughters of ignorance, and death herself is only hideous by reason of the rubbish which covers her, and the somber hues with which her images are surrounded. Death truly is the birth pang of life. There is a force in nature which dieth not, and this force perpetually transforms beings to preserve them. It is the reason or word of nature. In man also there is a force analogous to that of nature, and it is the reason or word of man. The word of man is the expression of his will directed by reason, and it is omnipotent under this leading, for it is analogous to the word of God himself. By the word of his reason, man becomes conqueror of life, and can triumph over death. The entire life of man is either the parturition or miscarriage of his word. Human beings who die without having understood or formulated the word of reason die devoid of eternal hope. To withstand successfully the phantom of death, we must be identified with the realities of life. Does it signify to God if an abortion wither, seeing that life is eternal? Does it signify to nature if unreason perish, since reason, which never perishes, still holds the keys of life? The just and terrible force which destroys abortions eternally was called by the Hebrews Samael, by other Easterns Satan, and by the Latins Lucifer. The Lucifer of the Kabbalah is not an accursed and ruined angel. He is the angel who enlightens, who regenerates by fire. He is to the angels of peace what the comet is to the mild stars of the springtime constellations. The fixed star is beautiful, radiant, and calm. She drinks the celestial perfumes and gazes with love upon her sisters. Clothed in her glittering robe, her forehead crowned with diamonds, she smiles as she chants her morning and evening canticle. She enjoys an eternal repose which nothing can disturb, and moves solemnly forward without departing from the rank assigned her among the sentinels of light. But the wandering comet, disheveled and of sanguinary aspect, plunges hurriedly from the depths of heaven and flings herself athwart the peaceful spheres, like a chariot of war between the ranks of a procession of vestals. She dares to face the burning spheres of the solar guardians, and, like a bereft spouse who seeks the husband of her dreams during widowed nights, she penetrates even unto the inmost sanctuary of the god of day. Again she escapes, exhaling the fires which consume her, and trailing a long conflagration behind. The stars pale at her approach. Constellate flocks, pasturing on flowers of light in the vast meadows of the sky, seem to flee before her terrible breath. The grand council of spheres assembles, and there is commissioned to speak in the name of all the firmament and offer peace to the headlong vagabond. My sister, she thus commences, why dost thou disturb the harmony of the spheres? What evil have we wrought thee? And why, instead of wandering wildly, dost thou not fix thy place like us in the court of the sun? Why dost thou not chant with us the evening hymn, clothed like ourselves in a white garment, fastened at the breast with a diamond clasp? Why float thy tresses and drip with fiery sweat through the mists of the night? Ah, wouldst thou but take thy place among the daughters of heaven, how much more beautiful thou wouldst be! Thy face would burn no longer with the toil of thine incredible flights. Thine eyes would be clear, thy smiling countenance white and red like that of thy happy sisters. All the stars would know thee, and far from fearing thy flight, would rejoice at thine approach. For then thou wouldst be made one with us by the indestructible bonds of universal harmony, and thy peaceful existence would be one voice more in the canticle of infinite love. And the comet replies to the fixed star, believe not, O my sister, that I am permitted to wander at will and vex the harmony of the spheres. God hath appointed appointed my path, even as thine, and if it appear to thee uncertain and vagrant, it is because thy beams cannot penetrate far enough to take in the circumference of the ellipse which has been allotted for my course. My fiery hair is God's beacon. I am the messenger of the suns, and I renew my strength continually in their burning heat, that I may dispense it on my journey to young worlds which have as yet insufficient warmth, and to ancient stars which have grown cold in their solitude. If I weary in my long travelings, if my beauty be less mild than thine own, and if my garments are not unspotted, yet am I a noble daughter of heaven, even as thou art. Leave me the secret of my terrible destiny. Leave me the dread which surrounds me. Curse me even if thou canst not comprehend. I shall none the less accomplish my work and continue my career under the impulse of the breath of God. Happy are the stars which rest, which shine like youthful queens in the peaceful society of the universe. I am the proscribed, the eternal wanderer who has infinity for domain. They accuse me of setting fire to the planets, the heat of which I renew. They accuse me of terrifying the stars which I enlighten. They chide me with breaking in upon universal harmony, because I do not revolve about their particular centers, though I join them with one another, directing my gaze towards the sole center of all the suns. Be reassured, therefore, O beauteous fixed star. I shall not impoverish thy peaceful light. Rather, I shall expend in thy service my own life and heat. I shall disappear from heaven when I shall have consumed myself, and my doom will have been glorious enough. Know that various fires burn in the temple of God, and do all give him glory. Ye are the light of golden candelabra. I am the flames of sacrifice. Let us each fulfill our destinies. Having uttered these words, the comet tosses back her burning hair, uplifts her fiery shield, and plunges into infinite space, seeming to be lost forever. Thus Satan appeared and disappeared in the allegorical narratives of the Bible. Now there was a day, says the book of Job, when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. A Gnostic gospel discovered in the East by a learned traveler of our acquaintance explains the genesis of light to the prophet of Lucifer as follows. Self-conscious truth is living thought. Truth is thought as it is in itself, and formulated thought is speech. When eternal thought desired a form, it said, Let there be light. Now this thought which speaks is the Word, and the Word said, Let there be light, because the Word itself is the light of minds. The uncreated light, which is the divine Word, shines because it desires to be seen. When it says, Let there be light, it ordains that eyes shall open. It creates intelligences. When God said, Let there be light, intelligence was made and the light appeared. Now the intelligence which God diffused by the breath of his mouth, like a star given off from the sun, took the form of a splendid angel who was saluted by heaven under the name of Lucifer. Intelligence awakened and comprehended its nature completely by the understanding of that utterance of the divine word. Let there be light. It felt itself to be free because God had called it into being, and raising up its head with both wings extended, it replied, He will not be slavery. Then shalt thou be suffering, said the uncreated voice. I will be liberty, replied the light. Pride will seduce thee, said the supreme voice, and thou wilt bring forth death. I needs must strive with death to conquer life, again responded the created light. Thereupon God loosed from his bosom the shining cord which restrained the superb angel, and beholding him plunge through the night, which he furrowed with glory, he loved the offspring of his thought, and said with an ineffable smile, How beautiful was the light! God has not created suffering. Intelligence has accepted it to be free, and suffering has been the condition imposed upon freedom of being by him who alone cannot err, because he is infinite. For the essence of intelligence is judgment, and the essence of judgment is liberty. The eye does not really possess light except by the faculty of closing or opening. Were it forced to be always open, it would be the slave and victim of the light, and would cease to see in order to escape the torment. Thus, created intelligence is not happy in affirming God, except by its liberty to deny him. Now the intelligence which denies invariably affirms something, since it is asserting its liberty. It is for this reason that blasphemy glorifies God, and that hell was indispensable to the happiness of heaven. Were the light unrepelled by shadow, there would be no visible forms. If the first angels had not encountered the depths of the darkness, the childbirth of God would have been incomplete, and there could have been no separation between the created and essential light. Never would intelligence have known the goodness of God if it had never lost him. Never would God's infinite love have shone forth in the joys of his mercy had the prodigal son of heaven remained in the house of his father. When all was light, there was light nowhere. It filled the breast of God who was laboring to bring it forth. And when he said, "Let there be light," he permitted the darkness to repel the light, and the universe issued from chaos. The negation of the angel who at birth refused slavery constituted the equilibrium of the world, and the motion of the spheres commenced. The infinite distances admired this love of liberty, which was vast enough to fill the void of eternal night and strong enough to bear the hatred of God. But God could hate not the noblest of his children, and he proved him by his wrath only to confirm him in his power. So also the word of God himself, as if jealous of Lucifer, willed to come down from heaven and pass triumphantly through the shadows of hell. He willed to be proscribed and condemned. He premeditated that terrible hour when he should cry in the throes of his agony, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" As the star of the morning goes before the sun, the rebellion of Lucifer announced to newborn nature the coming incarnation of God. Possibly Lucifer, in his fall through night, carried with him a rain of suns and stars by the attraction of his glory. Possibly our sun is a demon among the stars, as Lucifer is a star among the angels. Doubtless it is for this reason that it lights so calmly the horrible anguish of humanity and the long agony of earth, because it is free in its solitude and possesses its light. Such were the tendencies of the heresiarchs in the early centuries. Some, like the Ophites, adored the demon under the figure of a serpent. Others, like the Cainites, justified the rebellion of the first angel and that of the first murderer. All those errors, all those shadows, all those monstrous idols of anarchy which India opposes in its symbols to the magical Trimurti, have found priests and worshippers in Christianity. The demon is mentioned nowhere in Genesis. An allegorical serpent deceives our first parents. Here is the common translation of the sacred text. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. This signifies, according to the version of Fabre d'Olivet, now original attraction, cupidity, was the entraining passion of all elementary life, the interior activity of nature, the work of Joah, the being of beings. But herein Fabre d'Olivet is beside the true interpretation, because he was unacquainted with the grand keys of the Kabbalah. The word Nahash, explained by the symbolical letters of the tarot, signifies rigorously 14, Nun, the power which produces combinations. 5, He, the recipient and passive producer of forms. 21, Shin, the natural and central fire equilibrated by double polarization. Thus, the word employed by Moses, read Kabbalistically, gives the description and definition of that magical universal agent, represented in all theogonies by the serpent. To this agent, the Hebrews applied the name of Od when it manifested its active force, of Ob when it exhibited its passive force, and of Aur when it revealed itself wholly in its equilibrated power, as producer of light in heaven and gold among metals. It is therefore that old serpent which encircles the world and places its devouring head beneath the foot of a virgin, the type of initiation, that virgin who presents a little newborn child to the adoration of 3 magi and receives from them, in exchange for this favor, gold, myrrh, and frankincense. So does doctrine serve in all hieratic religions to veil the secret of natural forces which the initiate has at his disposal. Religious formula are these summaries of the words full of mystery and power which make the gods descend from heaven and become subject to the will of men. Judea borrowed its secrets from Egypt. Greece sent her hierophants and later her theosophists to the school of the great prophets. The Rome of the Caesars, mined by the initiation of the catacombs, collapsed one day into the church, and a symbolism was reconstructed with the remnants of all worships which had been absorbed by the Queen of the world. According to the gospel narrative, the inscription which set forth the spiritual royalty of Christ was written in Hebrew, in Greek, and in Latin. It was the expression of a universal synthesis. Hellenism, in fact, that grand and beauteous religion of form, announced the coming of the Savior no less than the prophets of Judaism. The fable of Psyche is an ultra-Christian abstraction, and the cultus of the pantheons, by rehabilitating Socrates, prepared altars for that unity of God, of which Israel had been the mysterious preserver. But the synagogue denied its Messiah, and the Hebrew letters were effaced, at least for the blinded eyes of the Jews. The Roman persecutors dishonored Hellenism, and it could not be restored by the false moderation of the philosopher Julian, surnamed perhaps unjustly the apostate, since his Christianity was never sincere. The ignorance of the Middle Ages followed, opposing saints and virgins to gods, goddesses, and nymphs. The deep sense of the Hellenic mysteries was less understood than ever. Greece herself did not only lose the traditions of her ancient cultus, but separated from the Latin Church, and thus for Latin eyes the Greek letters were blotted out, as the Latin letters disappeared for Greek eyes. So the inscription on the cross of the Savior vanished entirely, and nothing except a mysterious initial remained. But when science and philosophy, reconciled with faith, shall unite all the various symbols, then shall the magnificences of the antique worships be restored to the memory of men, proclaiming the progress of all human mind in the intuition of the light of God. But of all forms of progress, the greatest will be that which, restoring the keys of nature to the hands of science, shall enchain forever the hideous spectre of Satan, and, explaining all abnormal phenomena, shall destroy the empire of superstition and imbecile credulity. To the accomplishment of this work we have consecrated our life, and do still devote it in the most toilsome and difficult researches. We would emancipate altars by overthrowing idols. We desire the man of intelligence to become once more the priest and king of nature, and we would preserve by explanation all images of the universal sanctuary. The prophets spoke in parables and images, because abstract language was wanting to them, and because prophetic perception, being the sentiment of harmony or of universal analogies, translates naturally into images. Taken literally by the vulgar, these images become idols or impenetrable mysteries. The sum and succession of such images and mysteries constitute what is called symbolism. Symbolism comes, therefore, from God, though it may be formulated by men. Revelation has accompanied humanity in all ages, has been transfigured with human genius, but has never expressed the same truth. True religion is one, its dogmas are simple and within the reach of all. At the same time, the multiplicity of symbols has been a book of poesy indispensable to the education of human genius. The harmony of outward beauties and the poetry of form must reveal God to the infancy of man, but soon Venus had Psyche for her rival, and Psyche enchanted love. It came about, therefore, that the cultus of form yielded perforce to these ambitious dreams which adorned already the eloquent wisdom of Plato. Thus was the advent of Christ prepared, and was therefore also expected. It arrived because the world awaited it, and to become popular, philosophy transformed into belief. Emancipated by belief itself, the human mind protested speedily against the school which sought to materialize its signs, and the work of Roman Catholicism was solely an undesigned provision for the emancipation of consciences and the establishment of the basis of universal association. All these things were the regular and normal development of divine life in humanity, for God is the great soul of all souls, that immovable center about which gravitate all intelligences like a cloud of stars. Human understanding has had its morning, its noon shall come, and the waning follow, but God will ever be the same. It seems, however, to dwellers on earth that the sun rises youthful and timid in the morning, shines with all its power at midday, and goes wearied to rest in the evening. Nevertheless, it is earth which revolves, while the sun is motionless. Having faith, therefore, in human progress and in the stability of God, the free man respects religion in its past forms, and no more blasphemes Jupiter than Jehovah. He still salutes lovingly the radiant image of the Pythian Apollo and discovers its fraternal resemblance countenance of the risen Redeemer. He believes in the great mission of the Catholic hierarchy and finds satisfaction in observing the popes of the Middle Ages who opposed religion as a check upon the absolute power of kings. But he protests with the revolutionary centuries against the servitude of conscience, which the pontifical keys would enchain. He is more Protestant than Luther, since he does not even believe in the infallibility of the Augsburg Confession, and more Catholic than the Pope, for he has no fear that religious unity will be broken by the malevolence of courts. He trusts in God rather than Roman policy for the salvation of the unity idea. He respects the old age of the Church, but he has no fear that she will die. He knows that her apparent death will be a transfiguration and a glorious assumption. The author of this book calls upon the Eastern Magi to come forward and recognize once again that divine master whose cradle they saluted, the great initiator of all the ages. All his enemies have fallen, all those who condemned him are dead, those who persecuted him have passed into sleep forever, but he is forever alive. The envious have combined against him, agreeing on a single point. The secretaries have united to destroy him. They have crowned themselves kings and proscribed him. They have become hypocrites and accused him. They have constituted themselves judges and pronounced his sentence of death. They have turned murderers and executed him. They have forced him to drink hemlock. They have crucified him. They have stoned him. They have burned him and cast his ashes to the wind. Then have they turned scarlet with terror, for he stands erect before them, impeaching them by his wounds and overwhelming them by the radiance of his scars. They believe that they had slain him in his cradle at Bethlehem, but he is alive in Egypt. They carry him to the summit of the mountain to cast him down. The mob of his destroyers encircles him and triumphs already in his certain destruction. A cry is heard. Is not that he who is shattered on the rocks of the abyss? They whiten and look at one another, but he, calm and smiling with pity, passes through the midst of them and disappears. Behold another mountain which they have just dyed with his blood. Behold a cross, a sepulchre, and soldiers guarding his tomb. Madmen, the tomb is empty, and he whom they regard as dead is walking peaceably between two travelers on the road to Emmaus. Where is he? Whither does he go? Warn the masters of the world. Tell the Caesars that their power is threatened. By whom? By a pauper who has no stone on which to lay his head, by a man of the people condemned to the death of slaves. What insult or what madness? It matters not. The Caesars marshal all their power. Sanguinary edicts proscribe the fugitive. Everywhere scaffolds rise up. Amphitheaters open, crowded with lions and gladiators. Pyres are lighted. Torrents of blood flow. And the Caesars, believing themselves victorious, dare add another name to those they rehearse on their trophies. Then they die, and their own apotheosis dishonors the gods whom they defended. The hatred of the world confounds Jupiter and Nero in a common contempt. Temples transformed into tombs are cast down over proscribed ashes, and above the debris of idols, above ruins of empires, he only, he whom the Caesars indicted, whom so many satellites pursued, whom so many executioners tortured, he only lives, alone reigns, alone triumphs. Notwithstanding his own disciples speedily misuse his name, pride enters the sanctuary. Those who should proclaim his resurrection seek to immortalize his death, that they may feed like ravens on his ever-renewing flesh. In place of imitating him in his sacrifice and shedding their blood for their children in the faith, they chain him in the Vatican as upon another Caucasus, and become the vultures of this divine Prometheus. But what signifies their evil dream? They can only imprison his image. He himself is free and erect, proceeding from exile to exile and from conquest to conquest. It is possible to bind a man, but not to make captive the word of God. Speech is free, and nothing can repress it. This living speech is the condemnation of the wicked, and hence they seek to destroy it. But it is they only who die, and the word of truth remains to judge their memory. Orpheus may have been rent by Bacchantes. Socrates may have quaffed the poisoned cup. Jesus and his apostles have perished in the utmost tortures. John Hus, Jerome of Prague, and innumerable others have been burned. St. Bartholomew and the massacres of September may have had in turn their victims. Cossacks, Nauts, and Siberian deserts are still at the disposal of the Russian emperor, but the spirit of Orpheus, of Socrates, of Jesus, and of all martyrs will live forever in the midst of their dead persecutors, will stand erect amidst decaying institutions and collapsing empires. It is this divine spirit, the spirit of the only Son of God, which St. John represents in his Apocalypse, standing between golden candlesticks, because he is the center of all lights, having 7 stars in his hand, like the seed of a new heaven, and sending down his speech upon the earth under the symbol of a 2-edged sword. When the wise in their discouragement sleep through the night of doubt, the Spirit of Christ is erect and vigilant. When the nations, weary of the labor which emancipates them, lie down and dream over their chains, the Spirit of Christ is erect and protesting. When the blind partisans of sterilized religions cast themselves in the dust of old temples, the Spirit of Christ is erect and praying. When the strong become weak, when virtues are corrupted, when all things bend and sink down in search of a shameful pasture, the Spirit of Christ is erect, gazing up to heaven and awaiting the hour of his Father. Christ signifies priest and king by excellence. The Christ initiator of modern times came to form new priests and new kings by science, and above all by charity. The ancient Magi were priests and kings, and the Savior's advent was proclaimed to them by a star. This star was the magical pentagram, having a sacred letter at each point. It is the symbol of intelligence which rules by unity of force over the 4 elementary potencies. It is the pentagram of the Magi, the blazing star of the children of Hiram, the prototype of equilibrated light. Towards each of its points a beam of light ascends, and from each a beam goes forth. It represents the grand and supreme athanor of nature, which is the body of man. The magnetic influence issues in 2 rays from the head, from either hand and either foot. The positive ray is balanced by the negative. The head corresponds with the 2 feet, each hand with a hand and foot, each of the 2 feet with the head and 1 hand. This ruling sign of equilibrated light represents the spirit of order and harmony. It is the sign of the omnipotence of the magus, and hence when broken or incorrectly drawn, it represents astral intoxication, abnormal and ill-regulated projections of astral light, and therefore bewitchments, perversity, madness, all that in a word which the Magi termed the signature of Lucifer. There is another signature which also symbolizes the mysteries of light, namely the sign of Solomon, whose talismans bear on one side the impression of his seal, which we have given in our doctrine, and on the other the following signature, which is the hieroglyphic theory of the composition of magnets, and represents the circulatory law of the lightning. Rebellious spirits are enchained by the exhibition of the 5-pointed blazing star, or the seal of Solomon, because each gives them proof of their folly and threatens them with a sovereign power, capable of tormenting them by their recall to order. Nothing tortures the wicked so much as goodness. Nothing is more odious to madness than reason. But if an ignorant operator should make use of these signs without knowing them, he is like a blind man who discourses of light to the blind, an ass who would teach children to read. If the blind lead the blind, said the great and divine Hierophant, both fall into the pot. And now a final word to recapitulate this entire introduction. If you be blind like Samson when you cast down the pillars of the temple, its ruins will crush you. To command nature, we must be above nature, by resistance of her attractions. If your mind be perfectly free from all prejudice, superstition, and incredulity, you will rule spirits. If you do not obey blind forces, they will obey you. If you be wise like Solomon, you will perform the works of Solomon. If you be holy like Christ, you will accomplish the works of Christ. To direct the currents of the inconstant light, we must be established in the constant light. To command the elements, we must have overcome their hurricanes, their lightnings, their abysses, their tempests. In order to dare, we must know. In order to will, we must dare. We must will to possess empire, and to reign we must be silent. Preparations. Every intention which does not assert itself by deeds is a vain intention, and the speech which expresses it is idle speech. It is action which proves life and establishes will. Hence it is said in the sacred and symbolical books that men will be judged not according to their thoughts and their ideas, but according to their works. We must do in order to be. We have therefore to treat in this place of the grand and terrific question of magical works. We are concerned no longer with theories and abstractions. We approach realities, and we are about to place the wand of miracles in the hands of the adept, saying to him at the same time, "Be not satisfied with what we tell you. Act for yourself." We have to deal here with works of relative omnipotence, with the means of laying hold upon the greatest secrets of nature and compelling them into the service of an enlightened and inflexible will. Most known magical rituals are either mystifications or enigmas, and we are about to rend for the first time after so many centuries the veil of the occult sanctuary. To reveal the holiness of mysteries is to provide a remedy for their profanation. Such is the thought which sustains our courage and enables us to face all the perils of this enterprise, possibly the most dangerous which it has been permitted the human mind to conceive and carry out. Magical operations are the exercise of a natural power, but one superior to the ordinary forces of nature. They are the result of a science and a practice which exalts human will beyond its normal limits. The supernatural is only the natural in an extraordinary grade, or it is the exalted natural. A miracle is a phenomenon which impresses the multitude because it is unexpected. The astonishing is that which astonishes. Miracles are effects which surprise those who are ignorant of their causes, or assign them causes which are not in proportion to effects. Miracles exist only for the ignorant, but as there is scarcely any absolute science among men, the supernatural can still obtain, and does so indeed for the whole world. Let us set out by saying that we believe in all miracles because we are convinced and certain, even from our own experience, of their entire possibility. There are some which we do not explain, though we regard them as no less explicable. From the greater to the lesser, from the lesser to the greater, the consequences are related identically and the proportions progressively rigorous. But in order to work miracles, we must be outside the normal conditions of humanity. We must be either abstracted by wisdom or exalted by madness, either superior to all passions or outside them through ecstasy or frenzy. Such is the first and most indispensable preparation of the operator. Hence, by a providential or fatal law, the magician can only exercise omnipotence in inverse proportion to his material interest. The alchemist makes so much the more gold as he is the more resigned to privations, and the more esteems that poverty which protects the secrets of the magnum opus. Only the adept whose heart is passionless will dispose of the love and hate of those whom he would make instruments of his science. The myth of Genesis is eternally true, and God permits the tree of knowledge to be approached only by those men who are sufficiently strong and self-denying not to covet its fruits. Ye therefore, who seek in science a means to satisfy your passions, pause in this fatal way. You will find nothing but madness or death. This is the meaning of the vulgar tradition that the devil ends sooner or later by strangling sorcerers. The magus must be impassible, sober and chaste, disinterested, impenetrable, and inaccessible to any kind of prejudice or terror. He must be without bodily defects and proof against all contradictions and all difficulties. The first and most important of magical operations is the attainment of this rare preeminence. We have said that impassioned ecstasy may produce the same results as absolute superiority, and this is true as to the issue, but not as to the direction of magical operations. Passion projects the astral light forcibly, and impresses unforeseen movements on the universal agent, but it cannot curb with the facility that it impels, and then its destiny resembles that of Hippolytus dragged by his own horses, or Phalaris victimized himself by the instrument of torture which he had invented for others. Human volition realized by action is like a cannonball, and recedes before no obstacle. It either passes through it or is buried in it, but if it advance with patience and perseverance, it is never lost. It is like the wave which returns incessantly and wears away iron in the end. Man can be modified by habit, which becomes, according to the proverb, his second nature. By means of persevering and graduated athletics, the powers and activity of the body can be developed to an astonishing extent. It is the same with the powers of the soul. Would you reign over yourselves and others? Learn how to will. How can one learn to will? This is the first arcanum of magical initiation, and that it might be realized fundamentally, the ancient custodians of sacerdotal art surrounded the approaches of the sanctuary with so many terrors and illusions. They recognized no will until it had produced its proofs, and they were right. Power is justified by attainment. Indolence and forgetfulness are enemies of will, and for this reason all religions have multiplied their observances and made their worship minute and difficult. The more we deny ourselves for an idea, the greater is the strength we acquire within the scope of that idea. Are not mothers more partial to the children who have caused them most suffering and cost them most anxieties? So does the power of religions reside exclusively in the inflexible will of those who practice them. So long as there is one faithful person to believe in the holy sacrifice of the Mass, there will be a priest to celebrate it for him. And so long as there is a priest who daily recites his breviary, there will be a pope in the world. Observances, apparently most insignificant and most foreign in themselves to the proposed end, lead notwithstanding to that end by education and exercise of will. If a peasant rose up every morning at 2 or 3 o'clock and went a long distance from home to gather a sprig of the same herb before the rising of the sun, he would be able to perform a great number of prodigies by merely carrying this herb upon his person, for it would be the sign of his will, and in virtue thereof would be all that he required it to become in the interest of his desires. In order to accomplish a thing, we must believe in our possibility of doing it, and this faith must be translated at once into acts. When a child says, "I cannot," his mother answers, "Try." Faith does not even try. It begins with the certitude of finishing, and it proceeds calmly, as if omnipotence were at its disposal, and eternity before it. What seek you, therefore, from the science of the Magi? Dare to formulate your desire, and then set to work at once, and do not cease acting after the same manner and for the same end. That you will shall come to pass, and for you and by you it has indeed already begun. Sixtus V said while watching his flocks, "I desire to be Pope. You are a beggar and you desire to make gold. Set to work and never leave off. I promise you in the name of science all the treasures of Flamel and Raymond Lully." What is the first thing to be done? Believe in your power and then act. But how act? Rise daily at the same hour and that early. Bathe at a spring before daybreak and in all seasons. Never wear soiled clothes. Wash them yourself at need. Practice voluntary privations that you may be better able to bear those which come without seeking. Then silence every desire which is foreign to the fulfillment of the great work. What? By bathing daily in a spring I shall make gold? You will work in order to make it. It is a mockery. No, it is an arcanum. How can I make use of an arcanum which I fail to understand? Believe and act. You will understand later. One day a person said to me, "I would that I might be a fervent Catholic, but I am a Voltairean. What would I not give to have faith?" I replied, "Say I would no longer. Say I will, and I promise you that you will believe. You tell me that you are a Voltairean, and of all the various presentations of faith, that of the Jesuits is most repugnant to you, but at the same time seems the strongest and most desirable. Perform the exercises of St. Ignatius again and again, without allowing yourself to be discouraged, and you will attain the faith of a Jesuit. The result is infallible, and should you then have the simplicity to ascribe it to a miracle, you deceive yourself now in thinking that you are a Voltairean. An idle man will never become a magician. Magic is an exercise of all hours and all moments. The operator of great works must be absolute master of himself. He must know how to repress the allurements of pleasure, appetite, and sleep. He must be insensible to success and to indignity. His life must be that of a will directed by one thought and served by entire nature, which he will have made subject to mind in his own organs, and by sympathy in all the universal forces which are their correspondents. All faculties and all senses should share in the work. Nothing in the priest of Hermes has the right to remain idle. Intelligence must be formulated by signs and summarized by characters or panticles. Will must be determined by words and must fulfill words by deeds. The magical idea must be turned into light for the eyes, harmony for the ears, perfumes for the sense of smell, savors for the palate, objects for the touch. The operator, in a word, must realize in his whole life that which he wishes to realize in the world without him. He must become a magnet to attract the desired thing, and when he shall be, let him be assured that it is important for the magus to be acquainted with the secrets of science, but he may know them by intuition and without formal learning. Solitaries living in the habitual contemplation of nature frequently divine her harmonies and are more instructed in their simple good sense than doctors, whose natural discernment is falsified by the sophistries of the schools. True practical magicians are found almost invariably in the country, and are frequently uninstructed persons and simple shepherds. Furthermore, certain physical organizations are better adapted than others for the revelations of the occult world. There are sensitive and sympathetic natures, with whom intuition in the astral light is, so to speak, inborn. Certain afflictions and certain complaints react upon the nervous system, and independently of the concurrence of the will, may convert it into a divinatory apparatus of less or more perfection. But these phenomena are exceptional, and generally magical power should and can be acquired by perseverance and labor. There are also some substances which produce ecstasy and dispose towards the magnetic sleep. There are some which place at the service of imagination all the most lively and highly colored reflections of the elementary light. But the use of such things is dangerous, for they tend to occasion stupefaction and intoxication. They are used notwithstanding, but in carefully calculated quantities and under wholly exceptional circumstances. He who decides to devote himself seriously to magical works, after fortifying his mind against all danger of hallucination and fright, must purify himself without and within for 40 days. The number 40 is sacred, and its very figure is magical. In Arabic numerals, it consists of the circle, which is a type of the infinite, and of the 4, which sums the triad by unity. In Roman numerals, arranged after the following manner, it represents the sign of the fundamental doctrine of Hermes and the character of the seal of Solomon. The purification of the magus consists in the renunciation of coarse enjoyments, in a temperate and vegetarian diet, in abstinence from intoxicating drink, and in regulating the hours of sleep. This preparation has been imposed and represented in all forms of worship by a period of penitence and trials preceding the symbolical feasts of life renewal. As already stated, the most scrupulous external cleanliness must be observed. The poorest person can find spring water. All clothes, furniture, and vessels made use of must be also washed carefully, whether by ourselves or others. All dirt is evidence of negligence, and negligence is deadly in magic. The atmosphere must be purified at rising and retiring with a perfume composed of the juice of laurels, salt, camphor, white resin, and sulfur, repeating at the same time the 4 sacred words, while turning successively towards the 4 cardinal points. We must divulge to no one the works that we accomplish, for, as specified in our doctrine, mystery is the exact and essential condition of all operations of science. The inquisitive must be misled by the pretense of other occupations and other researches, such as chemical experiments for industrial purposes, hygienic prescriptions, and the investigation of some natural secrets, and so on. But the forbidden name of magic must never be pronounced. The magus must be isolated at the beginning and difficult to approach, so that he may concentrate his power and select his points of contact. But in proportion as he is austere and inaccessible at first, so will he be popular and sought after when he shall have magnetized his chain and chosen his place in a current of ideas and of light. A laborious and poor existence is so favorable to practical initiation that the greatest masters have preferred it, even when the wealth of the world was at their disposal. Then it is that Satan, otherwise the spirit of ignorance, who scorns, respects, and detests science because at heart he fears it, comes to tempt the future master of the world by saying to him, "If thou art the Son of God, command these stones to become bread." Then it is that mercenary men seek to humiliate the Prince of Knowledge by perplexing, depreciating, or sordidly exploiting his labor. The slice of bread that he deigns to knead is broken into 10 fragments, so that he may stretch forth his hand 10 times. But the magus does not even smile at the absurdity, and calmly pursues his work. So far as may be possible, we must avoid the sight of hideous objects and uncomely persons, must decline eating with those whom we do not esteem, and must live in the most uniform and studied manner. We should hold ourselves in the highest respect and consider that we are dethroned sovereigns who consent to existence in order to reconquer our crowns. We must be mild and considerate to all, but in social relations must never permit ourselves to be absorbed, and must withdraw from circles in which we cannot acquire some initiative. Finally, we may and should fulfill the duties and practice the rites of the cultus to which we belong. Now, of all forms of worship, the most magical is that which most realizes the miraculous, which bases the most inconceivable mysteries upon the highest reasons, which has lights equivalent to its shadows, which popularizes miracles and incarnates God in all mankind by faith. This religion has existed always in the world, and under many names has been ever the one and ruling religion. It has now, among the nations of the earth, 3 apparently hostile forms, which are destined, however, to unite before long for the constitution of a universal church. I refer to the Greek Orthodoxy, Roman Catholicism, and a final transfiguration of the religion of Buddha. Hereunto, therefore, we have made it plain, as we believe, that our magic is opposed to the goetic and necromantic kinds. It is at once an absolute science and religion, which should not indeed destroy and absorb all opinions and all forms of worship, but should regenerate and direct them by reconstituting the circle of initiates, and thus providing the blind masses with wise and clear-seeing leaders. We are living at a period when nothing remains to destroy and everything to remake. Remake what? The past? No one can remake the past. What then shall we reconstruct? Temples and thrones? To what purpose, since the former ones have been cast down? You might as well say, my house has collapsed from age. Of what use is it to build another? But will the house that you contemplate erecting be like that which has fallen? No, for the one was old and the other will be new. Notwithstanding, it will be always a house. What else can you expect?
With Swiffer Duster, you get a clean, even, mild cruiser. Swiffer, in honor of all cleans.
Meat-proof, powered by Always. Washable period underwear with front-to-back protection for worry-free nights.
13.8 billion years ago, the universe began. In one moment, there was nothing, and the next, everything. Just how this is possible is perhaps the biggest question in all of science, crossing the boundaries between theory and experiment, physics and philosophy.
Transcendental Magick, written by Eliphas Levi, narrated by Henry Schrader. Magical equilibrium. Equilibrium is the consequence of 2 forces. If 2 forces are absolutely and invariably equal, the equilibrium will be immobility, and therefore the negation of life. Movement is the result of an alternate preponderance. The impulsion given to one of the sides of a balance necessarily determines the motion of the other. Thus, contraries act on one another throughout all nature by correspondence and analogical connection. All life is composed of an inspiration and a respiration. Creation postulates a shadow to serve as a bound for light, of a void to serve as space for the plenitude, of a passive fructified principle to sustain and realize the power of the active generating principle. All nature is bisexual, and the movement which produces the appearances of death and life is a continual generation. God loves the void which he made in order to fill it. Science loves the ignorance which it enlightens. Strength loves the weakness which it supports. Good loves the apparent evil which glorifies it. Day is desirous of night, and pursues it unceasingly round the world. Love is at once a thirst and a plenitude which must pour itself forth. He who gives receives, and he who receives gives. Movement is a continual interchange. To know the law of this change, to be acquainted with the alternate or simultaneous proportion of these forces, is to possess the first principles of the great magical arcanum, which constitutes true human divinity. Scientifically, we can appreciate the various manifestations of the universal movement through electric or magnetic phenomena. Electrical apparatuses, above all, reveal materially and positively the affinities and antipathies of certain substances. The marriage of copper with zinc, the action of all metals in the galvanic pile, are perpetual and unmistakable revelations. Let physicists seek and find out. Ever will the Kabbalist explain the discoveries of science. The human body is subject, like the earth, to a dual law. It attracts and it radiates. It is magnetized by an androgyny magnetism and reacts inversely on the two powers of the soul, the intellectual and sensitive, but in proportion to the alternating preponderances of the two sexes in their physical organism. The art of the magnetizer consists wholly in the knowledge and use of this law. To polarize action and impart to the agent a bisexual and alternate force is a method still unknown and sought vainly for directing the phenomena of magnetism at will. Highly trained judgment and great precision in the interior movements are required to prevent confusion between signs of magnetic inspiration and those of respiration. We must be perfectly acquainted, moreover, with occult anatomy and the special temperament of the persons on whom we are operating. Bad faith and bad will in subjects constitute the gravest hindrance to the direction of magnetism. Women, above all, who are essentially and invariably actresses, who take pleasure in impressing others so that they may impress themselves, and are the first to be deceived when playing their neurotic melodramas, are the true black magic of magnetism. So is it forever impossible that magnetizers who are uninitiated in the supreme secrets and unassisted by the lights of the Kabbalah should govern this refractory and fugitive element. To be master of woman, we must distract and receive her skillfully by allowing her to suppose that it is she who is deceiving us. This advice, which we offer chiefly to magnetic physicians, might find its place and application in conjugal polity. Man can produce two breathings at his pleasure, one warm and the other cold. He can project also either active or passive light at will, but he must acquire the consciousness of this power by dwelling habitually thereon. The same manual gesture may assimilate and give forth alternately what we are accustomed to call the fluid, and the magnetizer will himself be warned of the result of his intention by an alternative sensation of warmth and cold in the hand, or in both hands when both are being used, which sensation the subject should experience at the same time, but in a contrary sense, that is, with a wholly opposite alternative. The pentagram, or sign of the microcosmos, represents, among other magical mysteries, the double sympathy of the human extremities with each other and with the circulation of the astral light in the human body. Thus, when a man is represented in the star of the pentagram, as may be seen in the occult philosophy of Agrippa, it should be observed that the head corresponds in masculine sympathy with the right foot and in feminine sympathy with the left foot, that the right hand corresponds in the same way with the left hand and left foot, and reciprocally of the other hand. This must be borne in mind when making magnetic passes, if we seek to govern the whole organism and bind all members by their proper chains of analogy and natural sympathy. Similar knowledge is required for the use of the pentagram in the conjuration of spirits, and in the evocation of forms errant in the astral light, vulgarly called necromancy, as we shall explain in the 5th chapter of this ritual. But it is well to observe here that every action promotes a reaction, and that in magnetizing others or influencing them magically, we establish between them and ourselves a current of contrary but analogous influence, which may subject us to them instead of subjecting them to us, as happens frequently enough in those operations which have the sympathy of love for their object. Hence it is highly essential to be on our guard while we are attacking, so as not to inspire on the left while we respire on the right. The magical androgyny depicted in the frontispiece of the ritual has Solve inscribed upon the right and Coagula on the left arm, thus recalling the symbolical architects of the Second Temple who bore the sword in one hand and their trowel in the other. While building, they had also to defend their work and disperse their enemies. Nature herself does likewise, destroying and regenerating at the same time. Now, according to the allegory of Duquesneau's magical calendar, man, that is to say the initiate, is the ape of nature, who confines himself by a chain but makes him act unceasingly, imitating the proceedings and works of his divine mistress and imperishable model. The alternate use of contrary forces, warmth after cold, mildness after severity, love after anger, etc., is the secret of perpetual motion and the permanence of power. Coquettes know this instinctively, and hence they make their admirers pass from hope to fear, from joy to despondency. To operate always on the same side and in the same manner is to overweight one basin of the balance, and complete destruction of equilibrium is a rapid result. Continual caressings beget satiety, disgust, and antipathy, just as constant coldness and severity in the long run alienate and discourage affection. An unvarying and ardent fire in alchemy calcines the first matter, and not seldom explodes the hermetic vessel. The heat of lime and mineral manure must be substituted at regular intervals for the heat of flame, and so also in magic. Works of wrath or severity must be tempered by those of beneficence and love. If the will of the operator be ever at the same tension and directed along the same line, great weariness will ensue, together with a species of moral impotence. Thus the magus should not live altogether in his laboratory among his athanors, elixirs, and panticles. However riveting be the glance of that Circe who is called the cold power, we must be able to confront her on occasion with the sword of Ulysses, and resolutely withdraw our lips for a time from the chalice which she offers us. A magical operation should be followed by a rest of equal length and a distraction analogous but contrary in its object. To strive continually against nature in order to rule and conquer her is to risk reason and life. Paracelsus dared to do so, but even in the struggle itself he employed equilibrated forces and opposed the intoxication of wine to that of intelligence. So was Paracelsus a man of inspiration and miracles, yet his life was exhausted by this devouring activity, or rather its vestment was rapidly rent and worn out. But men like Paracelsus use and abuse fearlessly. They know that they can no more die than grow old here below. Nothing disposes us towards joy so effectually as sorrow. Nothing is nearer to sorrow than joy. Hence the uninstructed operator is astounded by attaining the very opposite of his proposed results, because he does not know how to cross or alternate his action. He seeks to bewitch his enemy, but himself becomes ill and miserable. He desires to make himself loved and is consumed for women who deride him. He endeavors to produce gold, and he exhausts all his resources. His torture is that of Tantalus. Ever does the water flow back when he stoops down to drink. The ancients and their symbols and magical operations multiplied the signs of the duad, so that its laws of equilibrium might be remembered. In their evocations, they constructed two altars and immolated two victims, one white and one black. The operator, whether male or female, holding a sword in one hand and a wand in the other, had one foot shod and the other bared. Moreover, either one or three persons were required for magical works, because the duad would mean immobility or death in the absence of an equilibrating motor, and when a man and a woman participated in the ceremony, the operator was always a virgin, a hermaphrodite, or a child. I shall be asked whether the eccentricity of these rites is arbitrary, and whether its one end is the exercise of the will by the mere multiplication of difficulties in magical work. I answer that in magic there is nothing arbitrary, because everything is ruled and predetermined by the one and universal dogma of Hermes, that of analogy in the three worlds. Each sign corresponds to an idea and to the special form of an idea. Each act expresses a volition corresponding to a thought, and formulates the analogies of that thought and will. The rites are, therefore, prearranged by the science itself. An uninstructed person who is not acquainted with the threefold power is subject to its mysterious fascination. The sage understands it and makes it the instrument of his will. When the work is accomplished with exactitude and faith, it is never ineffectual. All magical instruments must be duplicated. There must be 2 swords, 2 wands, 2 cups, 2 chafing dishes, 2 pentacles, and 2 lamps. 2 vestments must be worn, one over the other, and they must be of contrasted colors, a rule still followed by Catholic priests. Lastly, 2 medals must be worn at least, or otherwise none. The crown of laurel, rue, mugwort, or vervain must be doubled in like manner. One of them is used in evocations, while the other is burnt, the crackling which it makes and the curls of the smoke which it produces being observed as an augury. Nor is such observance vain, for in the magical work all instruments of art are magnetized by the operator. The air is charged with his perfumes. The fire which he has consecrated is subject to his will, and the forces of nature seem to hear and answer him. He reads in all forms the modifications and complements of his thought. He perceives the water agitated and, as it were, bubbling of itself, the fire blazing up or going out suddenly, the leaves of garlands rustling, the magical rod moving spontaneously, and strange, unknown voices passing through the air. It was in such evocations that Julian beheld the beloved phantoms of his dethroned gods, and was appalled at their decrepitude and pallor. I am aware that Christianity has forever suppressed ceremonial magic, and that it prescribes the evocations and sacrifices of the old world. It is not therefore our intention to furnish a new basis for their existence by revealing their antique mysteries after the lapse of so many centuries. Even in the order of facts, our experiments have been learned researches and nothing more. We have verified facts that we might appreciate causes, and it has not been our pretension to restore rites which are forever destroyed. The orthodoxy of Israel, that religion which is so rational, so divine, and so ill-known, condemns no less than Christianity the mysteries of ceremonial magic. From the standpoint of the tribe of Levi, the exercise of transcendental magic must be considered as a usurpation of the priesthood, and the same reason has caused the proscription of operative magic by every official cultus. To demonstrate the natural foundation of the marvelous and to produce it at will is to annihilate for the vulgar mind that convincing evidence from miracles, which is claimed by each religion as its exclusive property and its final argument. Respect for established religions, but room also for science. We have passed, thank God, the days of inquisitions and pyres. Unhappy men of learning are no longer murdered on the faith of a few distraught fanatics or hysterical girls. For the rest, let it be understood clearly that our undertaking is concerned with curious studies, and not with an impossible propaganda. Those who may blame us for daring to term ourselves magician have nothing to fear from the example, it being wholly improbable that they will ever become sorcerers. The Triangle of Pentacles. The abbot Trithemius, who in magic was the master of Cornelius Agrippa, explains in his steganography the secret of conjurations and evocations after a very natural and philosophical manner, though possibly for that reason too simply and too easily. He tells us that to evoke a spirit is to enter into the dominant thought of that spirit, and if we raise ourselves morally higher along the same line, we shall draw the spirit away with us, and it will serve us. To conjure is to oppose the resistance of a current, and to chain to an isolated spirit. Cum jurare, to swear together, that is, to make a common act of faith. The greater the strength and enthusiasm of this faith, the more efficacious is the conjuration. This is why newborn Christianity silenced the oracles. It alone possessed inspiration, it only force. Later on, when St. Peter grew old, that is, when the world believed that it had a legal case against the papacy, the spirit of prophecy came to replace the oracles. Savonarola, Joachim of Flores, John Hughes, and so many others influenced by turns the minds of men and interpreted by lamentations and menaces, the secret anxieties and protestations of all hearts. We may act individually when evoking a spirit, but to conjure we must speak in the name of a circle or an association. This is the significance of the hieroglyphical circle inscribed about the magus who is operating, and out of which he must not pass unless he wishes at the same moment to be stripped of all his power. Let us deal at this point with the vital and palmary question, whether the real evocation and real conjuration of spirits are things possible, and whether such possibility can be demonstrated scientifically. To the first part of the question, it may be replied out of hand that everything which is not an evident impossibility can and must be admitted provisionally. As to the second part, we affirm that in virtue of the great magical dogma of the hierarchy and of universal analogy, the Kabbalistic possibility of real evocations can be demonstrated. Concerning the phenomenal reality consequent upon magical operations accomplished with sincerity, this is a matter of experience. As already narrated, we have established it in our own persons, and by means of this ritual we shall place our readers in a position to renew and confirm our experiences. Nothing perishes in nature, whatsoever has lived goes on living, always under new forms. But even the anterior forms are not destroyed since they remain in our memory. Do we not still see in imagination the child whom we once knew, though now he is an old man? The very traces which we believe to be effaced from our memory are not in reality blotted out, for a fortuitous circumstance may evoke and recall them. But after what manner do we see them? As we have already said, it is in the astral light which transmits them to our brain by the mechanism of the nervous system. On the other hand, all forms are proportional and analogical to the idea which has determined them. They are the natural character, the signature of that idea, as the Magick termed it, and so soon as the idea is evoked, actively the form is realized and bodied forth. Schroepfer, the famous Illumine of Leipzig, terrified all Germany with his evocations, and his audacity in magical experiments was so great that his reputation became an unsupportable burden. He allowed himself to be carried away by the immense current of hallucinations which he had produced. The visions of the other world disgusted him with this, and he killed himself. His story should be a warning to those who are fascinated by ceremonial magic. Nature is not outraged with impunity, and no one can play safely with unknown and incalculable forces. It is this consideration which has led and will ever lead us to deny the vain curiosity of those who would see in order that they may believe, and we reply to them in the same words as we reply to an eminent Englishman who threatened us with his skepticism. You are perfectly within your right in refusing to believe. For our own part, it will not make us more discouraged or less convinced. To those who may assure us that they have scrupulously and boldly fulfilled all the rites, and that there has been no result, we would recommend that they should stay their hand, as it is possibly a warning of nature, who will not lend herself to them for these anomalous works. But if they persist in their curiosity, they have only to start afresh. The triad, being the foundation of magical doctrine, must be necessarily observed in evocations, for it is the symbolical number of realization and effect. The letter is commonly traced upon Kabbalistic pentacles, which have the fulfillment of a desire for their object. It is also the sign of the scapegoat in mystic Kabbalah, and St. Martin observes that inserted in the incommunicable tetragram it forms the name of the Redeemer. It is this which the mystagogues of the Middle Ages represented in their nocturnal assemblies by the exhibition of a symbolical goat, carrying a lighted torch between its two horns. In the 15th chapter of this ritual, we shall describe the allegorical forms and strange cultus of this monstrous animal, which represented nature doomed to anathema, but ransomed by the sign of light. The Gnostic agape and pagan priapic orgies which followed in its honor sufficiently revealed the moral consequence which the adepts drew from the exhibition. All this will be explained, together with the rites, decried and now regarded as fabulous, of the Great Sabbath and of black magic. Within the grand circle of evocations, a triangle was usually traced, but the side towards which the upper point should be directed was a matter for careful observation. If the spirit were supposed to be from heaven, the operator placed himself at the top and set the altar of fumigations at the bottom. But if the spirit came from the abyss, this method was reversed. Moreover, the sacred symbol of two interlaced triangles, forming the six-pointed star, known in magic as the Pantacle or Seal of Solomon, must be worn upon the forehead and the breast, and graven in the right hand. Independently of these signs, the ancients, in their evocations, made use of those mystical combinations of divine names which we have reproduced in our doctrine from the Hebrew Kabbalists. The magic triangle of pagan theosophists was the celebrated abracadabra, to which they attributed extraordinary virtues and represented as follows. This combination of letters is the key of the pentagram. The initial A is repeated 5 and reproduced 30 times, thus giving the elements and numbers of the two following figures. The isolated A represents the unity of the first principle, otherwise the intellectual or active agent. A united to B represents the fertilization of the duad by the monad. R is the sign of the triad because it represents hieroglyphically the emission which results from the union of the two principles. The number N, which is that of the letters of the word, combines the unity of the initiate with the deanery of Pythagoras, and the number 66, the added total of all the letters, form Kabbalistically the number 12, which is the square of the triad and consequently the mystic quadrature of the circle. We may remark in passing that the author of the Apocalypse, that key of the Christian Kabbalah, composed the number of the beast, that is to say, of idolatry, by adding a 6 to the double century of abracadabra, which gives 18 Kabbalistically, the number attributed in the tarot to the hieroglyphic sign of night and to the profane, the moon, together with the towers, dog, wolf, and crab, a mysterious and obscure number, the Kabbalistic key of which is 9. the number of initiation. On this subject, the sacred Kabbalist says expressly, "He that hath understanding," that is, the key of Kabbalistic numbers, "let him count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 636. It is, in fact, the decade of Pythagoras multiplied by itself and added to the sum of the triangular pantacle of abracadabra. It is thus the sum of all magic in the ancient world, the entire program of human genius, which the divine genius of the gospel sought to absorb or transplant. These hieroglyphical combinations of letters and numbers belong to the practical part of the Kabbalah, which from this point of view is divided into Gematria and Themura. Such calculations, which now seem to us arbitrary or devoid of interest, belong then to the philosophical symbolism of the East, and were of the highest importance in the